Okay, I'd like to call the City of Wheat Ridge Planning Commission for June 7th, 2018 to order. Can I please get a roll call of the members?
Alan Bucknam,
Present.
Emery Dorsey,
Here.
Daniel Larson,
Present.
Janet Leo, Scott Ohm,
Here.
Vivian Voss,
Present.
and Richard Peterson and Amanda Weaver are absent tonight.
Next order on the item on the order of the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Could you please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a motion to approve the order of the agenda today?
I make a motion to approve the order of the agenda.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda that we need to be aware of? No. Okay. Could I get a vote? Call for a vote, please.
Motion passed 6-0.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for May 17th, 2018. Can I get a motion to approve the order or?
Mr. Chair, I'll move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
All right. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
All right. Does anybody have any comments, changes? None? Okay. Call for a vote.
Motion passed 6-0.
All right. This is the time for any person to speak on any subject not appearing on tonight's agenda. If you're here to speak on a case that's coming before us tonight, you'll have an opportunity to do so. Is there anyone signed up to speak?
There's not.
Okay. All right. That'll conclude the public forums for tonight. All right. Next up is the public hearing. Let's see, here we go. Before I start, I'd like to welcome all members of the public. I'm glad there's so much interest tonight. Ask that you please respect the statements made by city staff, the applicant, and my fellow commissioners during the proceedings. If you, I'll cover some other stuff later, but let's get started. First case up is case number WS17-07, an application filed by Evergreen Devco, a request for approval of a major subdivision located west of Interstate 70, south of Highway 58, and north of approximately 33rd Avenue. And I believe we will hear from the city staff.
Alrighty. Good evening. For the record, Zach Wallace-Mendez. I'm a planner with the Community Development Department. Tonight I will be presenting case number WS17-07, a request for approval of a 13-lot subdivision. I would like to enter into the public record the contents of the case file, the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, and this digital presentation.
So entered.
The property is located within the city of Wheat Ridge. All appropriate notification and posting requirements have been met, and therefore the Planning Commission does have jurisdiction to hear the case. This is a 2016 aerial of the site, commonly known as Clear Creek Crossing. It is generally located south of Highway 58, west of Interstate 70, and north of the Applewood neighborhood here, approximately 33rd Avenue. As you can see on the aerial, the property is mostly vacant. There is Coors water storage pond here, and then Clear Creek traverses the site. Oh, and then there was a bit of 40th Avenue that was constructed under the highway by the city several years ago that kind of protrudes into the east side there. This is a zoning map of the property. The property is zoned both planned mixed-use development and planned commercial development. Surrounding zonings, the highways are zoned agriculturally. That was something that was done in the 70s. I don't exactly know why. North of Highway 58, there is the 44th Industrial Park, which is zoned planned industrial development. To the east, there's a mix of agricultural, which is this green and dark green, and then commercial, which are all of these orange, pink, red, and gray zonings. The Applewood Shopping Center is zoned planned commercial development, as is the 70 West Business Park. And then all of this kind of hatched out area is in unincorporated Jefferson County. This is a single family neighborhood, and then of course Applewood Golf Course and some Coors water storage ponds. I wanted to make one distinction here. There was that the boundary of this plat differs from the outline development plan for the Clear Creek Crossing development, which you heard back in, I believe it was January at a public hearing. The planned mixed use development boundary is highlighted here in blue, whereas the plat boundary is highlighted in red. In 2011, the entire site was rezoned and platted, and then in 2016, only the portion in blue was owned by Evergreen Development Company and therefore rezoned to planned mixed-use development. However, since the original plat covered the entire property, we now have to replat the entire property, which is a perfect segue into our Subdivision 101. Just as a reminder that subdivision plats only reconfigure lots, tracts, and parcels. They don't change the zoning on the property. So that being said, the approved uses and development standards for that planned commercial development from 2011, those portions will stay the same as they have been since 2011. And the portions that are planned mixed use development will stay the same as they were approved earlier this year. So just wanted to make that distinction and then kind of segue into our Subdivision 101. The subdivision consists of 10 pages. It's a large site. I'm going to quickly move through them here and then go into a little bit more detail on some of the major points at the end. So sheet 1 is our standard cover sheet. It has the legal description of the property, signature blocks, approval blocks if this is approved, as well as a vicinity map and then a case history box, very typical. Page 2 includes general notes as well as a lot of data. So this is all the data for the curves and the lines within the plat, very technical document. This page also includes the general legend for all of the following pages. Sheets 3 through 6, which I just realized now I did not change the numbering at the very bottom of the screen, so apologies. But sheets 3 through 6, which are all these, show the current lot configuration and essentially vacate all of the existing platted lot lines, easements, and right-of-way. And then sheets 7 through 10, which are these sheets here, then replat right-of-way, lot lines, easements. Just because of the size of the site and how much had been platted before, it was easier and cleaner just to kind of wipe the slate clean and then replat everything, in its new configuration at the same time. So I know I scrolled through those pretty quickly, but that was just overview. Now, I am not a Photoshop expert, so this was my best attempt at kind of patching all of those 4 pages together into one cohesive map so we could kind of take a more comprehensive look at the development or the subdivision plat. So on this map, I'm going to highlight a few things here. These light blue lines indicate the lot lines created by this plat. This darker blue indicates the floodplain, as it is required to show that on the plat document. The purple is the dedicated right-of-way, so you can see we have the hook ramps coming from I-70 here, dedicated Clear Creek Drive, and then a dedicated 40th Avenue. And then this red line is one of the only things that actually was not vacated from the earlier, or from the existing site conditions. This is the Denver water easement that's been in place for a couple of decades now. That remained in place, so it's still there, and I wanted to make sure that we all knew where that was and kind of how it traverses the site, because it is actually pretty impactful. Make sure I hit all my points here. So if we zoom into the northern portion of the property, still with these elements highlighted, let's see. So while we typically view plats for right-of-way easements and lot lines, I just kind of wanted to stray for just a second away from that, just to describe, since the plat includes more than the ODP document that was approved earlier this year, I just wanted to take a second to describe that interaction. So while the right-of-way is being platted all the way across the river, or the creek, excuse me, up to Highway 58, in reality, the ownership and development boundary essentially ends somewhere in this area here. So there will be a cul-de-sac bulb in the current development plans for the site around this area. In the future, if either of these sites develops under their current zoning, the road will need to be extended across Clear Creek in this already platted right-of-way. So I just wanted to make that distinction since it looks a little bit different than what we were looking at during the ODP. The right-of-way is dedicated now and will be rededicated in the same spot north of the creek, but it will not be developed at this time. Right now, the development proposal ends around this area here. Then we'll take a look at the southern portion of the property. Another little caveat is that the southern boundary line, there's a gap between this portion here of the roadway that will be built by the developer and the current Youngfield Service Road, which connects to 32nd Avenue. But the roadway will extend through, there's a vacant strip of land there next to the La Quinta that will be part of the Clear Creek Drive that will connect down to 32nd Avenue. So just another little caveat since some of the improvements are beyond the scope of the subdivision. So now I'm going to show the same map with a few more things highlighted, so it starts to get really cluttered. I want to note that not every easement is highlighted on this map. There's a lot going on here. It's a 200-acre property, so I've just kind of highlighted some of the keys that we should be aware of when we're reviewing the subdivision plat. For example, there's standard utility easements along most of the lot lines that I haven't highlighted here just because it would make things too cluttered. So I've just, again, highlighted a couple things. So again, the blue lines represent the lot lines, Denver Water Easement in red, purple is the right-of-way, and then the floodway. The green is a trail easement, which runs along Clear Creek. It also, at the request of the Prospect Valley Recreation District, which the developer has worked with very closely in making sure that this portion works. There will be a trail easement that connects from the Applewood Golf Course right here through the site. This lot right now is the Coors Water Pond. So the trail easement kind of goes around that pond and then links up here to Clear Creek Drive. One thing that I didn't show here, just because there's a lot of things going on near the right-of-way, is that trail easement actually continues up Clear Creek Drive until you hit the Clear Creek Greenbelt, where this trail easement is up there. Let's see, there is an existing 100-foot utility and access easement along the western portion of the property that is being maintained. And then there is a utility easement being platted to connect 40th Avenue and Clear Creek Drive. Both of those are shown in that brown color. And then just the last thing that I wanted to note is while there's standard utility easements kind of shown throughout the property, the developer has been working with Applewood Sanitation in order to provide sanitary service to the site. And they have requested very specific locations for their easements. So those are shown here in this like yellowish mustard color. So it kind of traverses the site. I think this one is existing, and then this one going north-south is new, being platted by the developer in order to service the site. Then we'll zoom in. I don't think I have anything specific to show, but just a quick zoomed in look at the northern half of the property, southern half of the property. On a project of this size, the applicant must be very engaged with the outside agencies, and they have been. They have been very involved in making sure that they are in contact with the water, sanitation, fire districts, and making sure that everything is able to move forward and is moving forward, and that it can all be paid for and fit in within the pro forma and all that kind of stuff. So as such, the referral did not yield any major comments or concerns. Public Works, this has been a very large plat to review, so Public Works still has a few minor comments that need to be addressed. They're mostly limited to typographical errors that kind of get missed when you're looking at very technical portions of the document. You miss that, the two letters are transposed. So there's just a few minor tweaks like that that need to be fixed. Other than that, the major drainage report and the final drainage report have been approved by Public Works. So they are definitely making progress, and those have been approved. West Metro Fire District had no comments or concerns. They just kind of noted their typical notes that permits are required through the fire district as well as the city before any vertical construction starts. And just a side note, there was a fire in a construction site downtown several months ago. So since then, we've been working very closely with the developer and the fire district to make sure that, all access points are covered when vertical construction starts, when there's actual combustibles on the site. So we've all been working very well together. Urban Drainage and Flood Control District just commented on the existing floodplain conditions on the site, which you saw on the plat. And then they desire to work with the developer to make the Clear Creek a true amenity to the site instead of kind of putting their back towards it, which the developer has also wanted to do. The police department and CenturyLink had no objections. Fairmount Fire serves the portion north of the creek, so that area was included in the plat, but no development is proposed for that site. So they had no objections, and they just noted that they wanted to kind of be kept in the loop of everything that was going on. So, if any development ever does occur north of the creek, they know what's going on the site. Excel acknowledged the platted utility easements, and then RTD, they didn't give a formal comment response, but I just wanted to add that, again, the city is working with the developer and RTD to see if we might be able to get some sort of transfer station on this site. No promises, but, that is an active kind of discussion that we're having that is ongoing. So with all of that, staff does conclude that all the agencies conserve the property and all requirements of Article 4 of the Zoning and Development Code, which is the subdivision regulations, have been met. Therefore, staff recommends approval with two conditions: that the developer enter into an SIA, subdivision improvement agreement, with the city, and that all minor corrections be made prior to the city council public hearing. So with that is the end of my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions. The developer, or the applicant, is here, and I don't believe she has a presentation, but she is able to answer any questions if you have any specific for her.
Okay, great. Let's start over here. Commissioner Leo. Nothing. Commissioner Voss.
I just have one if I could, what's that?
It's an
Oh,
Amber Alert, folks. All right.
all right.
Please continue.
On page 3, it speaks to the areas, mixed-use center, let's see. The areas outside of the ODP boundary are owned by Coors. They are included with this proposed subdivision plat. Why?
Because they were a part of the original plat for this. So what we're looking at here is the extent of this plat boundary, which is the same as the extent of the 2011 plat boundary, which we're essentially replatting. So in 2011, it was the Clear Creek Crossing subdivision filing 1, and this is subdivision filing 2. So basically replatting the same extent and boundary of that original plat. So at that point in time, Coors was involved with the development. I'm not sure to what degree. They're not involved with the Clear Creek Crossing development as we know it from several months ago, but they still own property in this area and therefore need to be included on the plat.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Some questions?
Real quickly, for my benefit, I wasn't here for that first go-around. Other than the Coors property, are there other property owners involved here, or is it a single owner?
I believe all of the portions outside of the Clear Creek Crossing, I believe all of these pieces are owned by Coors. All of the pieces outside of this blue and this blue area is owned by Evergreen Development Company, who brought through the rezoning for that particular portion.
So it's, other than Coors, it's one owner?
Sure, yes, within the plat boundary, I actually believe there might be two owners. Oh, Broken Arrow. Broken Arrow, sorry. So within this blue area, there's Evergreen Development Company, who owns a majority of the land, I would say, and then there's, I believe, a partner to Evergreen called Broken Arrow 3 LLC, who owns a few pieces of land.
And we have a single developer? Right.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Dorsey?
I have no questions.
Okay. Commissioner Rome?
No questions.
Okay. I don't have any questions myself at this time. Thanks. Okay. Now, we'd like to hear from the applicant. If the applicant wants to add anything to that, they're certainly welcome to. Okay. In that case, we'll go to the citizens forum for this case. Are there any citizens that are signed up to speak? Okay, I don't have a blank sheet here, but with as many people in the room that are here, I just want to make sure. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this case? No. Okay. All right. So I'll close the citizens forum. Any further questions from the commissioners for staff? All right. In that case, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I move to recommend approval of case number WS-17-07, a request for approval of a 13-lot subdivision on property zone, planned commercial development, and planned mixed-use development located west of Interstate 70, south of Highway 58, and north of 33rd Avenue approximately, for the following reasons. Number one, all agencies can provide services to the property with improvements installed at the developer's expense. Number two, the requirements of Article 4 of the Zoning and Development Code have been met with the following conditions. Number one, the developer shall enter into a subdivision improvement agreement whereby all required infrastructure improvements are in place prior to issuance of a building permits for individual lots. Number two, all minor corrects occur prior to the City Council public hearing.
All right, can I get a second? Second. All right, I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote, please.
Motion carries 6-0.
All right. Next up, we have two applications filed by Square Root Incorporated. Case number WZ-1707, which is a request for approval of a specific development plan for 9 cottage style duplexes and single-family homes, as well as case number WS-1704, a request for approval of a 9-lot subdivision for property located at 2826 Eden Street. Could I get a staff report, please?
Alrighty. Again, for the record, Zach Wallace-Mendez, planner. Tonight we are hearing WZ-1707 and WS-1704 for the Eaton Street Cottages proposed development. I would like to enter into the public record the contents of the case file, zoning ordinance, comprehensive plan, and digital presentation.
So entered.
And the property is located within the city of Wheat Ridge. All appropriate notification and posting requirements have been met, and therefore the Planning Commission does have jurisdiction to hear the case. As always, we'll begin with a 2016 aerial of the property. It is located on the east side of town on Eaton Street between 28th and 29th Avenue. As you can see, it's located here. Currently, there's a home, a very large garage, and then a carriage house, all of which were built, I believe, in the 40s. The property is zoned planned residential development. Surrounding properties in the area are zoned residential 1C or R3, as well as just a couple properties zoned residential 2, and then up by the Ashland Reservoir, there's a couple of R3A zoned properties. Much of the development in this area kind of flows with those with those zone districts. Small lot single family with some kind of low scale multifamily properties that you can see pretty clearly here on the aerial. Also along 29th Avenue, there's kind of a strip of commercial 1 zoning. So this is the West 29th Marketplace. There's a gas station here, a restaurant, some kind of low intensity neighborhood serving commercial uses. So at this point, I'll cover the plan development process pretty quickly. The property was rezoned from R3 and R1C to planned residential development in September of 2016. The zone change was accompanied by an outline development plan, which established the general lot layout, minimum setbacks, maximum heights, as well as standards related to landscaping, parking, and the accessory structures that were allowed on the building, or on the property, excuse me. What is being heard today is step 2 in the plan development process, which is the specific development plan. So this is a much more fine-grained plan for development, which, when combined with the plat, essentially makes the project shovel-ready, for lack of a better term. In order to be approved, the specific development plan must be found in compliance with the approved outline development plan that was approved back in September of 2016. And then, as was mentioned before, there is a subdivision accompanying this development plan. So we review the specific development plan and the subdivision concurrently to make sure that the lot lines are lining up and that everything is ready to move forward for development.
Excuse me for a sec. Could I ask the audience to please refrain from making comments or talking while the staff is giving their presentation? Thank you.
So the specific development plan consists of 8 pages. You have a full-size copy in your packet, and I'll go through kind of the major elements that are found on each of those pages here. So the front page consists of a vicinity map, signature blocks and approval lines, as well as a project data table here describing each of the lots and size, acreage, number of, or percentage of landscaping that is being proposed for the lots, all that kind of stuff. Page 2 is essentially a site plan. This shows exactly where the buildings are going, where the parking is located, where the shed, they have proposed a kind of a shared shed where that is going, as well as the common courtyard, entryways into the property from both Eaton Street as well as from the parking lot are all shown here, as well as the streetscape improvements that will be installed along Eaton Street, so kind of formalizing some on-street parking spaces. Page 3 includes the landscaping plan. So much of the area is kind of in this hatch color, or not hatch color, excuse me, hatch pattern. So that's on each of the individual lots. The individual future property owners of kind of each one of these homes will be responsible for the landscaping within their lot. But then the developer is responsible for the common area landscaping. So they propose landscaping along Eaton Street, a little bit within this parking lot area to buffer the parking lot from the adjacent uses, and then as well as landscaping within this common courtyard area. Page 4 is just very specific landscaping information, so specific species, the city's standard planting kind of regulations, and all that, so not much to look at there for us. SDP 5 shows the elevation of the single-family detached model. So one thing I failed to mention on the site plan here is there are 5 single-family detached homes, so this one, and then these 3 along this side. And then there's 4 duplexes kind of centered in the middle of the site here. So two housing types. So the first one, that single-family detached, those elevations are shown here. So kind of a 1.5-story type home. And then page 6 is elevation of the duplex model. So 1-story elevation there. Page 7 detail some of the building systems and then the footprint of the homes. This is more relevant for the building folks. But they've also noted here that their exterior color schedule will be determined at the time of their building permit, so they haven't picked those out quite yet. I think they have kind of a general idea of what they want to do, but they didn't want to go as far as assigning a color to each home or something like that at this point in time. And then the last page details the approved accessory structures for the property. So the outline development plan, which was approved back in September of 16, allowed 2 accessory structures, one being a carport and one being a shed. So I guess actually they don't have the shed on here, but the carport is shown here, which will cover about 10 of the 15 parking spots on site. And then they'll have their typical trash enclosure, just kind of shown here, so we know what things will look like on the site. So now, a lot of data here. We'll go through the outline development plan and the specific development plan to make sure, compare them and make sure that the specific development plan does indeed line up with what was approved by City Council back in September of 16. So minimum lot size was required to be about 1,800 square feet. What they proposed ranged from about 2,000 to 2,500, so it does meet the minimum lot size. Minimum side and rear setbacks were 10 feet. On the specific development plan, they range from about 10 to 14 feet, so that is in compliance. Minimum setbacks for the parking lot and shed were 6 feet. The parking lot sits about 6 feet from the property line, while the shed sits about 8 feet from the property line. There's a minimum separation of 10 feet between buildings. Of course, the duplexes which are attached are exempted from that. But that minimum separation is 10 feet, and what they propose is between about 10 and 12. The front setback is a little bit complicated. No more than 22% of the total street frontage will have buildings set back from Eaton Street a minimum of 10%, and then everything else needs to be at least 20 feet setback, 20-foot setback. So they do have just about 22%, I think it's slightly under 22% of the street frontage along Eaton Street. That's about 10 to 15-foot setback, and the remaining buildings are between 20 and 22 feet setback. They were required 14 spaces off-street. They provided 15, and their maximum building height was limited to 25 feet. And as you saw in the elevations of the 2 models, they're about 1 to 1.5 stories. So they range from about 17 to 19.5 feet. So they're in compliance with the ODP and SDP, or their SDP, excuse me, let me rephrase that. Their specific development plan is in compliance with their outline development plan. We'll get into the subdivision. Again, we've been through this 2 times already tonight already. So first page, owner certificate, signature blocks, general notes, vicinity map, approval lines. Page 2 of their subdivision includes their current plat, or how the lots are currently configured for the site. So this was platted back in 1890. It was very typical back then for developers to plot 25 by 125 or 130 foot wide or deep lots. So this property consists of 9 of those 25 by 132 foot lots, and then a sliver of a 10th, as you can see down on the south side of the portion of this lot. This is very typical. We see this all over East Wheat Ridge. I think it's very typical probably in West Denver, Edgewater. All of this area is platted like this and often sits straddling multiple lots or even slivers of lots. The third page in their subdivision shows what they are proposing, which we'll walk through quickly here. Here's a more zoomed in version, and then like I did with the last subdivision, we'll kind of talk through some of the major components. Blue lines indicate the lot lines being platted by this plat. The yellow are indicate easements. So there's standard utility easements around the edge of the property, access and utility easements to allow access to these rear lots. And then there's a major utility easement that I presume, I don't remember specifically from the plans, but due to the width, I would presume this is probably the water and sewer lines that comes into the property and then feeds each of the individual lots. And then this red indicates the tracts on the property. So this red area, these are not sellable lots. These are common, or tracts held in common by the HOA, essentially. So tract B includes this area as well as the common area. So this is This is very commonly held, commonly used tract. This includes the parking, the shared parking areas, the shared shed area, as well as the common courtyard. Tract A includes the detention and stormwater area for this property. So the property utilizes permeable pavers. So essentially it drains into the parking lot and then seeps into the ground. So that tract A is for stormwater. And then tract C is just a landscape tract maintained by the HOA. I think they may have their common mailbox area within this tract. During the public posting and notification, we received one call. It was someone who had been through the outline development process or been very involved during the outline development plan process and was inquiring about what exactly was going on now. So I described the difference between the ODP and the SDP, and then why the plat was necessary. She said she'll be in attendance, so maybe she'll be here and speak to you all later. And during the referral, there were no major concerns. All of the utility districts said that they could serve the property. So, in conclusion, for the specific development plan, staff finds that it is consistent with the goals and policies of the city's guiding documents, consistent with the plan development regulations, and most importantly, consistent with the outline development plan that was approved by council. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the specific development plan. And then for the subdivision, it results in a logical layout that is consistent with the development proposed by the specific development plan, complies with the subdivision regulations and the zoning and development code. And as I just stated, all utility agencies can serve the company or the property. Therefore, we recommend approval of the subdivision with a couple of conditions. First of all, we'd ask that a plat note be added that includes all of the language from section 26.420 that was inadvertently overlooked during our review. I've included the language from 420 in your packets, and essentially it should be for all multifamily or any kind of connected development, like the duplexes being connected here. I believe it has to do with the zoning defect or the construction defect laws, but I may defer, if you have any questions on that, I may defer that to the director of our department. A second condition would be that no building permit may be issued until a demolition permit is pulled through the city for all of the existing structures. Fourth standard for a subdivision, we ask that the developer enter into a subdivision improvement agreement with the city. And finally, that the city review and approve all the HOA covenants just to make sure that the stormwater and common area features are being adequately addressed. So with that, I will answer any questions that you have. The developer is also here and can answer any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. We'll start over here with Commissioner Ohm.
Thank you. As staff and the planning commissioners are aware, there's a SMIDL checklist, SDP SMIDL checklist. One of the requirements is a photometric plan. Where is the photometric plan for the SDP?
They did not submit a photometric plan. We typically don't accept them or require them for for residential developments, such as single families and duplexes like this. They're more for like multifamily or commercial developments or industrial too.
So there won't, excuse me, there won't be any exterior lighting for any of the cars or anything. There's just going to be lights, just like a typical lighting for the houses.
That would be a question for the developer.
Okay, because that is, I want to make sure that there's not light spillage onto neighboring properties, and it's hard to do that if there isn't a photometric plan. Because there's also will there be any new street lights proposed?
I will defer that to our engineering division, Public Works.
Okay. So that's one question I have. The other is on the SDP submittal checklist. As I'm looking at their criteria for the landscape plan, it says they're supposed to provide required and provided shrubs, trees, street trees, size of plants, trees, caliper of trees, bald and burlap. That information, the required and provided number of, they're missing quantities, they're missing sizes of plant trees. They're missing calipers of trees. And so I would say that the landscape plan has not met that requirement. It's incomplete. That's what it appears to me as I've looked through the sheets 3 and 4. The landscape plan is very hard to read. Any plant material that's on there is, I would say, kind of ghosted out. And that's just a comment I have. I have no other comments, but that's my question, is that the landscape plan appears to be incomplete. Thank you.
Commissioner Dorsey? I have no comments. Okay. Commissioner Larson?
No comments to this.
Commissioner Boston? Commissioner Leo? All right. Let's see. Can we get some clarification on the streetlights? Is there any new lighting?
I don't believe there's a streetlight being installed.
All right, great. All right, would the applicant like to make a presentation, or is the applicant available to answer some questions regarding Commissioner Ohm's questions? Great, come on up, please state your name and address for the record.
Andrew Gibson, 4250 Irving Street, Denver, Colorado.
Great, thank you. We'll just have the commissioners address the applicants directly. Commissioner Ohm?
So why is the photometric plan missing?
We weren't aware that it was required as a part of the application. We did develop one just during our sketch process for the project.
Right.
So the intent is to have, in terms of public area lighting, we would have some lighting there by the parking structure. Each individual lot would probably have just porch lights on their houses. I think that would be it for the public lighting part of the.
So so you said you weren't aware of it on the checklist?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is Curtis, he's our engineer.
Okay.
Curtis Stevens with Sanitas Group. I'm the engineer who is coordinating this. I actually did have a discussion with staff about the photometric plan requirement, and in this case, we don't have any pole lights, any site lighting like pedestrian street lights being proposed. It was only your low wattage porch lighting.
Okay.
It is similar on the underside of the parking structure, and based on discussions with staff, they said a photometric plan is typically not required when you're just dealing with like the 60-watt porch lights and no poles.
No poles. Okay.
And I will confirm there was no street light component in this either.
And then I had some other questions about the SDP checklist requirements for landscaping.
So we did, and I apologize on the way the landscape plan with the hatching kind of came through, but the requirements were with regards to listing tree numbers and sizes were specific to the right-of-way and public space component. So if you look on the SDP sheet, there is a list of required number of street trees, and then each specific street tree required is labeled with a type of tree and a size per city requirements, which is small, medium, or large. So it says like medium, size tree, and where those are going to go to be compliant with the code. The actual individual lots, because they're essentially a single-family lot.
Right.
There isn't my understanding, based on the discussion, is there's no code requirement for the SDP to say each lot owner has a tree here. But what we did do, because they have a desire for how this is going to look, there is a kind of design guideline we tried to provide for the city to say each owner has to provide a certain number of trees and shrubs, but they can pick because it's their personal space.
I think mine was more directed, I understand that, thank you for that. It was directed more specifically towards the public, the street. Why there isn't a schedule that shows, there's 3 Kentucky coffee trees, or there's whatever shrubs that you have, a specific quantity, and why there isn't a size next to that, what kind of a container, it's just missing. I guess.
I think due to the scale of the site, just working with staff, we had gone with the showing each individual tree with the labels saying this type of tree, this size, and then just the standard detail for the
Okay.
group.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dorsey? Okay. Commissioner Larson?
No question.
Okay. Commissioner Boss?
Hi, I just had one comment and a question. That house that's existing there now, it just seems ripe for leaving it, so I'm sorry to see that it's going to be demolished and not incorporated into your plans. Will these be for rent or for sale?
Be for sale.
For sale. And market value?
Market value, yeah, market value.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Leo? Okay. And Commissioner Larson, question?
Was I correct in hearing that there will be an HOA covenant put in place then, or
Yes, sir.
there will?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions. Thank you very much. Now is the time for the Citizens Forum. Do we have anyone signed up to speak? Okay, we do. And don't worry, if you're not signed up and you still want to speak, you'll have an opportunity. We'll start with the folks on the list, though. If you want to come up and speak, please feel free to. If you're just indicating whether you're in favor or opposed, you don't feel you have anything to add, that's also fine. Andrew Gibson. Would you? Oh, sorry. That's right. Mark O'Brien. Yeah, okay. All right. Is there? That's it for my list. Are there any citizens who would like to come up and speak? Sir, why don't you come up? Please state your name and your address, and please address your comments or questions to us up here at to the commissioners. If you have questions that we can get answered by staff or the applicants, we'll do that after we've taken everybody's comments and questions. Thank you.
My name is Stephen Flug. I reside at 2845 Eaton Street, right across the street from the proposed development. And my only...
Can you spell your last name, please?
I'm sorry?
Can you spell your last name?
P as in Paul, F as in Frank, L-U-G. I guess our only issue is, and I speak for some of my neighbors also, and it came up at the original May 24th, I think, on the first go-around, was the parking issue. And I noted now that there are 15 on-site parking places, 1.5 per residence, right? We feel that that's still going to be inadequate because there'll probably be 18 vehicles in the complex, 2 per unit, would be our guess. But anyway, the other big concern, and we spoke at length about this with council and the developers, was the curbs that come out. I don't know what do you call those? The curb that comes out into the street.
Those are pullouts for parking.
I know we talked about those at length, and is the intent still to keep that big pine tree?
That is exactly what the main bump out in the middle was designed around the big pine tree.
Right, but and that's bump out was on this thing.
Sir, just address your questions to us. We'll have the applicant come up to the mic to answer them so that we can get it entered into the record.
What bump out will be for the pine tree?
I believe he stated it was the one in the center.
Oh, it is
Yes.
the one on the center. Oh, okay. Well, then the one on the, and so there'll be a bump out at the driveway also then?
That is how it appears, yes.
As I talked about and the other neighbors talked about before, parking is, even with, parking can be an issue there on that block, even now, without, additional residences. So we were just trying to keep the bump outs down to a minimum, obviously, for more on-street parking. So that's about all I had. I know I'm excited about the project and have expressed that to both Andrew and Mark. And I know the neighbors are also, because we're not going to wind up with a big duplex. I mean, a big condominium or something, so yeah. So that's about all I had.
Great, okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any other citizens who would like to ask a question to the commission? Okay, come on up and state your name and address.
My name's Noble Harrison. I live at 2855 Eaton Street. I also live directly across the street from the proposed development. I would first of all want to echo Steve's concern about the parking. You've got 9 individual buildings, 4 of those are duplexes. That's 13 units. The average U.S. household has over 2 vehicles. That's 26 vehicles with 15 parking spaces. So I'm not sure if there is going to be areas along the property that these additional vehicles would be able to park, or if they are going to be parking directly in front of my house.
Okay, we'll talk. We'll ask about typical parking standards in that type of neighborhood and see if we can look at that a little more. Thanks. All right. Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to comment or speak? Okay, come on up. Yeah, you back there, and then we'll get to you. All right. If you could come up and give your name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Marion McNamee. That's M-C, capital N-A-M-E-E. I'm at 2809 Eaton. I'm down at the corner of 28th and Eaton on the west side. We had an issue this summer with construction up on 29th when they were putting the big pipes in. And they were running big dump truck fulls of dirt down Eaton around the corner on 28th going either east or west. And it caused some serious problems. Even was out in the yard one day when one of the dump truck guys was threatening basically to run this woman over who was questioning people coming, them running the dump trucks up and down the street. These were full-size dumps. And my only request with all of this is to please don't let those guys come down the street without doing something, working with the city on some parking mitigation problems at the end of the street. If you're gonna run big trucks down and around the corner on 28th, they've got to limit any parking along 28th so those trucks can actually get around the corner without running over our properties. Because it happened both with my lot and it happened with the multi-unit lot across the street. That's it.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, why don't you come on up? Thank you.
My name is Janet Ryan, R-Y-A-N. I live at 2825 Depew Street, which is on the back side of this development. The electricity at this point comes right down the property line, the backs of my side and their side. And I'm wondering if there's going to be, and it's overhead. I'm wondering if the electricity and the power is going to continue to be overhead or if it's going to be moved underground and how that will impact the residents, me and my neighbors on Depew Street.
Okay, great. We'll ask that question. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? No more comments? Okay, great. Well, we'll try to get these questions answered. So let's start with parking standards. Questions for staff. As far as we're aware that the parking that is in this SDP exceeds meets/exceeds the requirements in the ODP, which has already been approved. But could we talk just for a little bit about what the general residential parking requirements are in the typical zoning that's around here, just to kind of provide a little context, and how the development's on-site parking it should be put into context with the on-street parking in a typical residential environment like this around the southeast part of Wheat Ridge.
So for single family and duplexes, there's a requirement for 2 off-street parking spaces if there is on-street parking kind of adjacent to the property. If there is no on-street parking, then there is 4 on-site spaces required, or 4 off-street parking spaces required for a single family or duplex home. Yeah, when the ODP went through council, it was approved at 1.5 per unit. So that equals, I think it's like 13.5, so you round up to 14. They've provided 15, as well as they're kind of formalizing 5 spaces along the street, which don't count towards their off-site parking requirements, but they are there. And I just wanted to clarify an earlier comment. So there's 2 sets of duplexes, so 4 total, so there's 9 units total. I think earlier it was said there might be 13, but it's 9 units total, 15 off-street parking spaces, and then kind of formalizing 5 on-street spaces. So there's about 20 adjacent or within the property for those 9 houses to utilize.
Okay. All right. And I'll just note, we'll give the applicant a chance to address all these same issues too. I just want to get staff's input on these issues first. As far as the curb, those curb cuts go, it's just refresh our memory. Do those cut into the sort of what's the existing off street? Like if you were to look at Eaton Street now, are those bulbs going out into what is now the street, or is it being carved out of basically the right-of-way that's currently not street?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to pull up the aerial, but you nailed it. So there's a portion of Eaton Street that looks like front yard, but is actually within the city's right-of-way. It is going within that portion.
So it won't narrow Eaton Street. Anybody parking in those areas isn't going to be basically parking in what is Eaton Street now. It's going to be in that right-of-way that's currently unimproved.
Yeah, and so I think the image that's on the screen above, there's that light gray portion, and there's a dark gray portion, and there's like a sliver where the bump outs are, and then the full parking spaces. That is new. The darker is new pavement. So Eaton Street, as it exists now, is that light gray. So they'll be extending it further into what looks like the property.
Okay, all right. Talking about, this is probably more something that the applicant can address, but I'm guessing, and maybe the Public Works folks might have some info on this, I'm guessing that the construction vehicles during the Denver water improvement work along 29th weren't going down 29th because of all of the construction work that was taking place underneath 29th. That's why they were going down to 28th. Is that?
I would, yeah.
Although maybe only Denver Water knows for sure, and they're not.
Yeah, I would assume so. I think the truck traffic associated with that will be much greater than what's associated with this development, but I'll definitely talk with our construction manager, Russ, and make sure we take a look at that before this is constructed.
Okay, yeah, I would, having lived through that ordeal of trying to get down 29th during all of that, I know obviously 29th is a bigger street, can handle more capacity. I would hope that they'd be able to move construction traffic from this site up to 29th as opposed to down to 28th. But okay, one other question. Actually, this is probably a question for the applicant about electricity. Does Public Works have any comment on the electricity, or should the applicant address that? Just along between that lot line between the Depew side streets and the Eaton Street.
Right. So with new development, they are required to underground the electricity. And I'll be honest, most of the time we deal with this, the electricity is along the major street. So I'm not actually sure exactly how. Then I don't know if they're then responsible for undergrounding everything to the houses, or if the poles stay there and continue their regular service to the homes. I don't know if Public Works has any additional comment on that.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be undergrounding that line. I would assume the service line would be underground. The engineer might be able to clarify that, but I'm not aware that they're going to be undergrounding any of that.
Okay. Yeah, I am noticing, and that's the last topic that we have here. So if the applicant wants to come up, maybe we can start by asking that question about the utilities, electrical utilities. I am noticing we have on the subdivision plat a utility easement over there, 8 feet along that side of the property that backs up to the Depew Street properties. Can you provide any more insight on the status of what will happen with electrical?
Sure. Yeah, it's our understanding that the overhead line that runs along the back of the lot will stay in place and continue to service the houses on Depew as they're serviced now, so there shouldn't be any impact in that regard. All of the service lines that run to the units on the Eaton Street project will be underground, so there'll be pedestals placed on our property, and from those pedestals the underground services will go to the houses, so won't be any overhead wires on the site, but there shouldn't be any impact to the existing service for the existing customers.
Okay, great. As far as construction vehicles, can you provide any, I mean, I know it's a little early, but can you provide any insight on?
It's like a nightmare on that 29th Street project. We got an email actually from the butcher that we go to, and they were like, please come in, because no one could get into the business there. This is a I mean, it is a subdivision, but it's a small subdivision, and so we'll be happy to take any suggestions that the city might have in terms of truck traffic and how it comes and goes from the site. I would anticipate that the trucks would come in from 29th and then head back north on Eaton Street back to 29th, and that they wouldn't be cutting through the neighborhood. And we can direct our subs to follow that traffic pattern if that seems amenable to everybody. In terms of the dirt work that's going to go on the site here, we are extending the main, the wastewater, the sewer main onto the site, and then there's the dirt work associated with all of the houses. So it's going to be weeks, not months. That's just the scope of this project.
Okay, all right. And then would you like to make any comments on parking?
Sure. The whole concept for this site, it's a pocket neighborhood, and they've been building these neighborhoods up in the Pacific Northwest for almost 20 years now. The architect that we hired to design the site for us was sort of the pioneer who started designing these pocket neighborhoods. After the ODP was approved, I flew up there and toured a couple of them, about 5 or 6 of them with Ross. And parking is sort of a perennial issue with these pocket neighborhoods at this stage during the design process, and so it's something that comes up pretty frequently. What they found up there is a couple of things. One, the size of the houses are pretty small. The duplexes are 2-bedroom, 1-bath houses. They're less than 1,000 square feet. They're on one level. The larger units are less than 1,400 square feet, and so you can't predict how many cars people are going to own, but we are anticipating that there definitely are going to be some occupant owners that are living alone or have only one car. And that's sort of been proven out in these developments that have been built up near Seattle, is that typically the parking that's provided off-site is more than adequate to accommodate the number of cars that are associated with houses that are this small. The other thing about this particular development that that we're really keyed in on is its walkability, and how close it is to amenities that you can get to on your bike or on or just by walking. And for you guys that live on Eaton Street, you know that. So there's Edgewater, there's Sloan's Lake, Highlands is just a bicycle ride away, and so we're kind of planning it and marketing it that way in the hopes that people will leave their cars and get outside on their bikes and walk to places and not be coming and going all day once they get home. Again, this is what the planning process is about, but that is our intention for the project and for the traffic and the cars.
All right, thank you. One moment. I want you to see there, I think Commissioner Larson has one additional question.
Are we still taking from the public?
Well, actually, I didn't close the citizens forum, so if there is anyone else who would like to come up and ask any more questions, this is your last chance. Okay. So I'll close that. And now, Commissioner Larson, one more question.
Mr. Chairman, if you please. Can you give us just a ballpark on from when you start demo on the existing property to when people are starting to move in? You said weeks, not months, but give me just a ballpark on that.
Yeah, we're hoping to put a year-long construction schedule together for this project. 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other final questions? Commissioner Leo?
I think it was explained to me, but I just want to be 100% clear. There are no driveways, of course there are garages, I understand that, but there's nowhere where cars can be parked adjacent to the...
No, ma'am.
Okay, what about guest parking? Because with this number of spaces, they're going to be taken up by residents.
Like I said, I can't predict how many cars are going to be coming and going with guests, and all I can do is tell you what I've seen on similar projects that have been built just like this, where the number of spaces has been equal to or less than this. So I can't answer that. I'm not sure.
Commissioner Voss.
Are there a lot of homes existing on Eaton that have their own garages or off-street parking now?
Yes.
Most of them do?
Yeah.
All right. So there's not a lot of on-street parking then as the resident?
You know, you'd have to talk to the owners on Eaton Street. I mean, just in driving down that street, it seems like people do park on, the owners do park on the street.
And then if I could ask the parking on the street, how many, we've got 2 bulb ins, not outs. How much parking space do each of those?
5 spaces total.
Each of them contain 5?
5 spaces total on the street frontage.
Total.
So 3 in the larger one to the north and 2 in the smaller one to the south.
All right, thank you.
Any more questions from this side? Okay. All right, thanks very much. With all of that addressed, I'm going to ask for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion, but before I do, this is for the SDP. I don't know that I can agree to items 3 and 4 where it says all requirements for an SDP have been met, because in my opinion they have not, and I can't agree to the criteria used to evaluate an SDP have been met because it's missing the required photometrics on the checklist, and it's missing information on the landscape plan. So if I make this motion, I would like to omit items 3 and 4, and then add a condition, and I'll read it real quick before I make the motion. The condition would be that the SDP landscape plan and photometric plan be in compliance with the city's SDP submittal checklist, and that the landscape plan legibly show the proposed and existing plants. That would be my condition. So I'm not sure how staff feels about that. Otherwise, I'm generally okay with the plan. It's just those 2 items. And if staff feels that the photometric plan is not required, I would like to see the applicant request a variance for the photometric plan. Unless there's something in the code that says that, duplexes are exempt from photometric plans for the SDP.
So I guess the central issue is more whether the requirement for a photometric plan is encoded in the law, or if it's more of a convention to either have it or not have it, depending on the building type. Is that sort of the crux of the?
I think generally, if staff supports, I don't see why there'd be an issue. If they generally support not having a photometric for duplexes, then a variance would be granted. So I guess that's my concerns and questions.
Well,
I'll chat with staff. We can chat with staff too to see what their input is. But
why don't we ask staff? Staff, what do you think?
So I'll take a shot at that. Those checklists are really just done they're developed by staff for the convenience of the applicant in terms of packaging submittals. It's not a codified standard to have the photometric. I think the landscape plan comment makes perfect sense, and we can certainly get a somewhat more detailed landscape plan before we get this finalized and go to Mylar.
So the photometrics is not codified.
It's not codified, and particularly not applicable for single family and duplexes, as has been discussed. Yeah.
So then the other question is, should we leave items 3 and 4 and then just have the condition? Even though it's kind of not true, but if it's a condition, then it would become true? Okay.
Yeah, I would say since it's not part of the code, but it's a staff.
Right.
Staff policy, I think we should leave it in the way it is. Just make your condition.
Okay. Okay, I'm ready, Mr. Chair.
Wait, before you do,
yes.
Sorry, can I just, one thing that I don't think I mentioned during my presentation, Planning Commission is the final deciding body for specific development plans, and then for the subdivision, you are just a recommending body. So for the suggested motions, it should actually read, for the specific development plan, I move to approve case number, or I approve to deny case number. Scratch out the to recommend. Sorry, I was just in automatic mode when I was writing that, and so
it's going to say I move to approve?
Yeah, on the SDP case, but
right, yes.
It's recommend approve on the subdivision case.
Yep, and then the condition, you can add that.
Okay.
So
sorry about that.
And just to clarify our process here, why don't we entertain motions on the SDP first, and then we will move on to the subdivision.
Correct. Okay. Mr. Chair, I move to approve case number WZ-17-07, request for approval of a specific development plan for property zone planned residential development located at 2826 Eaton Street for the following reasons. The proposal is consistent with the city's guiding documents, including the neighborhood revitalization strategy and Envision Wheat Ridge. Number 2, the proposed SDP is consistent with the approved ODP document. Number 3, all requirements for an SDP have been met. Number 4, the criteria used to evaluate an SDP have been met, with the following condition: that the SDP landscape plan be in compliance with the city's SDP submittal checklist, and that the landscape plan legibly show the proposed and existing plants.
All right, can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Commissioner Dorsey seconds. Any further discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote, please.
Motion carries 5-1.
All right, thank you. Now, moving on to the subdivision case, I will entertain motions on the subdivision. Everything all right? Okay, just check.
Mr. Chairman,
There are conditions on the subdivision.
on the, okay, then I don't know what they are.
It's item 10, suggested motions, page 8.
It's on the backside, what I just read off of.
No, there are no changes that we've discussed, just what staff recommended, yeah.
I move to recommend approval of case number WS17-04, a request for approval of a 9-lot subdivision for property zoned planned residential development, PRD, located at 2826 Eaton Street for the following reasons. All agencies can provide services to the property with improvements installed at the developer's expense. The plat will result in a logical layout consistent with the future development proposed by the specific development plan. The requirements of Article 4 of the Zoning and Development Code have been met, with the following 4 conditions. A plat note be added with the language contained in Section 26-420, plat note concerning multifamily development. No building permit shall be issued until a demolition permit is issued for the existing home, carriage house, and garage. The developer shall enter into a subdivision improvement agreement whereby all required infrastructure improvements are in place prior to issuance of building permits for individual lots. The homeowners association covenants be reviewed and approved by staff prior to issuance of building permits.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call for a vote, please.
Motion carries 5-1.
All right, thank you. So we've got 3 more cases. I just want to take a quick poll. Does anybody need a break? Okay, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and then we will resume. rejoin our meeting today. We're going to start with our fourth case actually. Item C, case number WZ-18-09. This is an application filed by Nathan Laudick for approval of a zone change from residential 1 to planned residential development for an outline development plan for property located at 9800 West 38th Avenue. And can I have the staff report, please?
Good evening. For the record, Meredith Recker, Wheat Ridge Community Development. And joining me at the staff table are, of course, Zach Wallace-Mendez, who just presented, Kenneth Johnstone, who is our Community Development Director, also Jordan Jeffries, who's the Development Review Engineer in Public Works and has been helping us with this case. So I'd like to enter into the record the case file and packet materials, the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, and the contents of the digital presentation.
So entered.
The property is located within the city of Wheat Ridge, and all notification and posting requirements have been met. Therefore, the Planning Commission does have jurisdiction to hear this case. So case number WZ-1809 is an application for approval of a zone change from residential 1 to planned residential development with an outline development plan, and the property is located at 9800 West 38th Avenue. And the purpose of the request is to allow construction of a new residential development on the property. Now, Zach went over our plan development process, but I just thought I'd reiterate that it is a two-step process. The first step is the outline development plan, which is actually the document that accompanies a zone change request to plan development. It is a concept plan and shows the zoning, proposed zoning on the land, establishes allowed uses, development standards, and so on, but it is not detailed. Assuming an ODP gets approved, the second step in the process is the specific development plan, which usually has a plat that accompanies it, and that's where we're looking at the specific development with architecture and landscaping and so on. In this case, the applicant is requesting the two-step process, which means the outline development plan is getting considered first, and should that be approved by City Council, then they would move to the next step, which is the specific development plan and plat. So the property is outlined in red. You can see that 38th Avenue runs along the northern portion of the property, or along that northern property line, with Johnson Street over on the western side. This is a 2016 aerial photo, so it's fairly accurate as to the existing conditions. The property has about 275 feet of width along 38th, 140 feet of street frontage along Johnson, and the southern boundary of the property is angled. There's also about 20 feet of fall on the property, running from the northeast corner to the southwest. So this is the same 2016 aerial that depicts the zoning on the property, as well as the zoning on other adjacent parcels in the proximity. So again, north is to the top. You can see the property outlined in red, 38th Avenue running across its northern frontage, Johnson Street down its side. So the zoning on the property is R1, as is a lot of the property to the south. You can see that yellow color extends south from 38 for most of that. R1 is our largest lot, single family zoning designation, which has a minimum requirement for a single lot to have 12,500 square feet of land area with 100 feet of lot width. Some other zonings in the area, if we move closer over to 38th Avenue, this gray area right in here is, this little piece right here is owned by the city of Wheat Ridge. It is currently vacant. And then it attaches to Discovery Park, which extends south to 35th Avenue. As we get over into the intersection of 38th and Kipling, the red designation does indicate C1, which is a general commercial office retail zone district. and the new development that has the Sprouts and Starbucks called Kipling Ridge is located within that. To the north, we've got some additional residential zoning. This happens to be R2, which allows single family and duplexes. So let's go through some slides. So this particular site was, I believe, standing adjacent to Johnson Street, looking to the northeast up towards 38th Avenue. This is a little bit closer view of that 38th Avenue frontage. And here we're standing looking east along that 38th Avenue frontage, which is on the very left-hand side of the image. Moving south across the property, you can see the adjacent single/two-family dwellings to the east. And then this is looking south along the Johnson Street frontage over on the west, the right-hand side of the image. These trees in the background are located adjacent to that waterway that runs adjacent to the property on the south. So included in your packet was a copy of the outline development plan. It is comprised of 2 pages. The first page is what I like to call the declaration sheet. And again, it has the typical cover page with certifications. There's a legal description and signature block. Also on the first page is a character of development statement that talks about the intent of the design of the product that's being proposed, and also a list of permitted uses and other notes. So up here, there is the listing of the permitted uses. What's being proposed is that the property be developed into 8 duplexes. Also allowed are accessory uses such as home occupations and the keeping of household pets. We have indicated some notes prohibiting detached accessory structures, RV or boat storage parking within the development, which has been consistent with the way we've been looking at our plan developments for residential development. So the second page shows the conceptual layout of the property. North is to the top, so 38th Avenue runs here up on the north side of the property frontage. Johnson Street comes down on the west side. And the layout does show a conceptual design for the property. There are 2 access points shown, one on 38th Avenue up here on the very northeast corner, and then another one sort of mid Johnson Street frontage, and they are connected by a private drive to service the units. So there are proposed to be 4 duplexes on each side, which would be 8 on each side, both the north and the south. The units will be facing out, so either they'll be facing out towards 38th Avenue with the front of their units facing 38th, or facing south towards that open space. And the garages, which each of the units will have a 2-car garage, will be accessed from the private drive. They have included 6 overflow parking spaces, 2 over here adjacent to the 38th Avenue entrance, and then there are another 4 down here near the Johnson Street entrance. We also have, I believe, 3 on-site parking spots. Again, we're using parking pull-offs for folks to be able to come in here and park to get them off the street so that access is not complicated. Let's see, there is a large landscape tract which is shown along the southern end, and that is intended to accommodate the drainage on the site. Historically, runoff has drained from the northeast site down to the southwest corner, and the proposed drainage design for the site will mimic that historic flow. Let's see what else. Public Works has been considering the traffic generation generated by the site, and they have concluded that the traffic from the site is not anticipated to have an impact on traffic in the neighborhood. Let's see what else. There are some pedestrian ways included as one on the south side of the private drive that connects 38th Avenue with Johnson, and then one sort of meandering sidewalk that runs along the south side of the southern units with, I guess, on the edge of that detention area. With regard to development standards, I set up this table so you could see the existing zoning, which is R1, as opposed to the planned residential development. They are showing, let's see, 16 units on 1.2 acres, which comes out to a density of about 12.5. In the R1 zone district, the number of units is generally about 3.6. I would note that the 12 units per acre is consistent with our R3 zoning, which we consider sort of a mid-range density. In some of our other zone districts, like the mixed use, and also in other planned developments, they can go up to 21 units per acre. So what's being proposed is about half of that. Let's see what else. Again, uses in R1 are limited to single-family residential. In the proposal, they are allowed to have two-family dwellings. In the R1, there are no real architectural standards that are codified. And within this development plan, they have included some architectural concepts on the ODP, which includes a 30% masonry requirement on the frontages. They've also put a limitation on the roof design based on input from the neighborhood, and so that prohibits any sort of flat or sloped single plane roof. Let's see, the building orientation typically in an R1 zone district, it kind of falls back to that sort of 1950s development with the big front yard. So in R1, the minimum front setback would be 30 feet. With the planned residential development, the proposed, I guess it would be called the front setback, would be 15 feet from the plan boundary. So again, the units will be facing either 38th Avenue or the open space, and they will have a 15-foot setback for the front. So, as the commission is aware, we have specific zone change criteria included in the zoning code in section 26-112E, and I've got them sort of summarized on the screen, and I'll go through those in just a second. So in regard to this criteria, we've made the following conclusions. We've concluded that the property has been underutilized and has been the subject of code enforcement action in the past with violations including weeds, illegal parking, and illegal dumping. We think that the zoning will have a positive impact on the area, not only aesthetically, but also from a property value perspective. And also, the project will serve as a transition between 38th Avenue, which is an arterial, and the low-density residential to the south, and it will also support the new development that was recently put in at 38th and Kipling. All of the responding agencies have indicated that they can serve the property with improvements installed at the developer's expense. Should the zone change be approved, we'll go through another round of referrals as part of the SDP and plat. We've concluded that the development activity along the Kipling corridor continues to intensify with new commercial, again at the 38th and Kipling Ridge shopping area, and also we're seeing improvements further south at 26th Avenue in the Gold's Market area, and also further north on Kipling. The Kipling corridor is considered a principal arterial and carries about 39,000 cars per day. And 38th Avenue is also a lesser arterial and carries about 13,000 vehicles per day, which could lead you to believe that perhaps this particular site is better suited to something more dense than the R1 zoning that's currently in place. The city has also invested into the Kipling Street corridor with help from federal funding. We just, I think within the last 3 years, completed installation of a 10-foot wide multimodal trail from 26th Avenue up to 44th on the eastern side of Kipling, and so that's been a great addition to the area. The other thing that we're seeing, of course, is the recreational corridor along Kipling. We've got Discovery Park, we've got the rec center, and of course, the open space at 26th Avenue. So again, based on increased traffic and intensification of land uses, we are concluding that there are changed conditions and perhaps this property is not as desirable for low-density residential as it would be something a little bit more dense. So another one of the criteria that I like to spend a little bit more time on is the comprehensive plan. Envision Wheat Ridge was adopted in 2009. See an excerpt of the plan on the screen. So the property is located right in here. This is 38th Avenue. This is Kipling. This would be the Kipling Ridge Shopping Center. The rec center is up here. The property is shown as a neighborhood classification, which is a place for people to be able to live and thrive and have good investment in their residential properties. A lot of times these areas are anchored by some sort of either civic use, and in this case we've got several in this area. We've got Everett Middle School just to the north. We've got Discovery Park, obviously just across the street, and also the rec center just a little bit further to the north. The red ring around the intersection designates Community Commercial Center, and which I think speaks for itself. We're seeing some intensification of the land uses, a lot of investment in that area with the Sprouts and the Starbucks, and now we're going to see some new development on the northwest corner of that intersection as well. We've concluded that the new duplexes will provide homes that can support these commercial uses and will have convenient access to some of the recreational amenities in the area. So there are other components of the comp plan, as you're aware, and I've pulled out a couple of the goals that are not included in part of the structure plan. And those would include the availability of new housing choices, the improvement of an underutilized property that has been somewhat of perhaps an eyesore at times, and has been a maintenance issue, and it may serve as a catalyst for other improvements in the area. As far as process goes, because this is a zone change, there was a neighborhood meeting held on March 7th, 2018. We had 15 plus or minus neighbors in attendance, and we had 2 comment letters submitted. There was a synopsis of the neighborhood meeting in your packet as one of the exhibits. We went out on our standard referral for this application, and there were no concerns for any agency. The applicant will be responsible for upgrades to the property for utilities and so on. And again, if this is approved, we would move on to the next step, which is the SDP and plat, and there will be another referral process for that. So this evening, Planning Commission will be making a recommendation to City Council, where the public hearing is scheduled for July 23rd, 2018, and City Council, of course, is the final authority on this. So we have concluded that the zone change will provide a land use transition between 38th Avenue and the low-density neighborhood to the south. We've concluded that the redevelopment could act as a catalyst for other improvements and investments in the area, that all service agencies can serve the property, that the zone change is supported by the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, and that the criteria for evaluation support approval of the request. I do want to make one note of clarification. When I talked about height in the staff report, and just now when I was going through my development standard chart, I just want to make a clarification that on the development plan, there are 2 categories for height on this property. The northern row of duplexes will be limited to 2 stories in height. However, the southern row, adjacent to the open space, they're proposing to be allowed to go up to 35 feet. So that would be one correction I would have to make in my staff report. The applicant is in the audience and would be available for questions, and as am I.
Great, thank you for that report. Questions from the commissioners, starting over here with Commissioner Ohm.
Thank you. On sheet 2, preliminary site plan, there's some minor spelling errors along Johnson Street. I'm not going to go over those specifically, but they're very minor. And then on sheet 2, what is the width of the existing or proposed sidewalk along 38th? It's not called out.
I believe the existing width is 5 feet,
Okay.
which is the minimum for ADA accessibility. That does not meet our current standard. If improvements were to be installed along 38th Avenue, we would require a 6-foot wide sidewalk with a 6-foot tree lawn. And in this situation, they have provided some options for the developer to either build those improvements or to pay fees in lieu of for future street improvements.
So currently, they haven't made a decision. They're keeping it existing, and
I'm not sure they've decided.
okay,
That might be
okay. And then, is there any concern? I know around the neighborhood, there's a lot of, I think it's probably permit parking, because the residences don't want park users parking in their, in the neighborhood. That's my understanding. Is there any concern about those 3 spaces along Johnson being used by park users? And,
Johnson is a public street, and so really, we don't like to have permit parking. Sometimes we have it adjacent to some of the schools, like I know adjacent to Wheat Ridge High on Holland, we have some permit parking because of the kids parking there. We haven't talked about that yet.
I mean, I guess it could understandably go the other way, where somebody could park at the park and walk over to the residence. And then you did bring up something about the units per acre. I'm a little surprised that it's so low and that it's duplexes. I almost would have, because of the traffic, would have anticipated probably townhomes versus the 12 units per acre duplexes. Was that staff driven, or was that the applicant driven?
The original proposal was for townhouses. They were showing 23 in 2 rows, kind of a similar configuration to this with the center road. Based on testimony at the neighborhood meeting, they did modify the plan to change it to duplexes and to reduce the number of units proposed.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
Commissioner Dorsey?
I have no questions at this point.
Okay, Commissioner Larson?
Just a couple here for staff. You mentioned elevation early on, and it seems like the units on the east and the road are going to be right up against that hill. And I think you said it's 20 feet, a 20-foot drop. Is that, how do they plan on managing? Yeah, will there be a structure built to retain, or?
Well, I will defer that question to Jordan Jeffries, who has looked at the drainage preliminarily.
Yeah, we haven't seen a preliminary grading plan, but I assume there'd be some sort of retaining walls required to make this work.
And that would be included in the follow-on? Right, okay. Then I have a question about the private road going in. It looks like there's going to be egress and access onto 38th, which is a fairly busy street. Would there be a traffic light there, or just a controlled turn? Or?
Well, there's no call for any sort of signalized intersection either at 38th Avenue or at Johnson. Our traffic reviewer did look at the proposal in regard to the amount of traffic they thought would be generated, and thinks that the existing street system will support it as is.
Okay, given the fact that that 38th Street access is on a hill.
Yes.
And that the traffic coming to the west will be going downhill.
Jordan, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
There is a dedicated left on 38th Avenue. This development's typically smaller than what we would require a traffic impact study for. We didn't look at the traffic warrants, but I think it's a pretty safe bet that this wouldn't meet the warrants for a signal at Johnson Street.
Okay. And then the Iris Court, which is the adjoining property, It looks like at some point they probably had that rezoned from R1 to R2A.
Yes, and that was, I believe, done in the late 80s. And
Do we know why?
do we know why? I don't remember why. I know I worked on it. But it was being proposed by a developer, and I would suspect it was for the same reasons as this. You know, 38th Avenue still desirable for R1 development, and it was approved by Planning Commission and City Council.
Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Voss?
Yes, just a couple. What was the roof style you referred to, not a flat top and not a...
Yes, so again, this was, my understanding is it was based on conversations with the neighbors, is they are not supportive of a sloped roof, where you've got like a shed roof where it's just one big large angle that comes down over the house, or one of just the flat top kind of examples that we see being built these days.
So what does that give you, a pitch roof then? Yeah, okay. Well, that would make sense. The trees to the west and the south, who owns those, the developer?
I don't know.
I'll ask the developer about that then. And that's it, thanks.
Commissioner Leo? Okay. I've got just a couple questions. Regarding the number of units per acre, I understand the rationale for increasing the density because traffic on 38th, traffic on Kipling has increased since it was originally zoned. There is R2 zoning across the street. There's R3 zoning across the development to the west in Kipling. There's R2A next door to the east. How does the density compare to the R2 across the street and the R2A?
I didn't do the math, but my recollection is in R2, it's about 6.7.
Okay.
It's a little bit denser,
so
like say R1 zoning, 12,500 square foot lots. R2 for a single family is 9,000 square feet. So
this is somewhere, 12 units per acre is somewhere between R2 and R3.
right, yeah. So when I did my calculation, not on the report, but then I checked it today. It's consistent with the R3 regs.
Okay.
So a
All
little
right.
bit denser.
All right, and regarding Commissioner Larson's comments about the private drive access, maybe public safety issues with in and out off of 38th, considering there is that hill to the east, is considering like a right in, right out sort of thing, or any other sort of controlled traffic or traffic control, is that something that would be more appropriate for conversation during an SDP process?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's what I thought. All right, unless there are any other questions for staff from the commissioners, I will ask, thank you for that, and then ask the applicant to come up and make a presentation if they would like to, and if not, to please come up and answer some questions that we already have. If you could just state your name and address for us, thanks.
Hi, my name is Nathan Loddick. My address is 6324 Xavier Court, Arvada, Colorado. First, I want to thank the Planning Commission for being here tonight, Meredith and the other staff for the work you guys have done on this, and then most importantly, the members of the neighborhood that are here, including Fran, Margaret, Ihor, Rich, Don, Diane, Guy, Dada, Jerry, and everybody else that was involved in all the extra meetings we had after the required meeting we held at the city. There was 2 other group meetings we held outside of that, and then I met individually with some of the other adjacent landowners to receive their input. And like she noted before, going into the initial neighborhood meeting, we did propose 23 townhome units for this site. I strongly believe that would have been a good use for this area, given all the investment that's gone into the 38th and Kipling corridor, and having as many people as possible take advantage of the walkability of this site to the rec center, to the new Sprouts, the Starbucks, the school, the new trail that was built on Kipling and everything else. But going into that second neighborhood meeting, there was some concern about the density to the south part of the site and in relation to the R1. So we eliminated all the townhomes to the south, changed those to duplexes, but we kept the row of townhomes along 38th, and that would have resulted in 18 units. Again, there was some some pushback against that. So we went all the way, removed all of the townhome units, went to just straight duplexes across the site, which I still think is a good site plan. And hopefully the neighborhood is a little bit happier with that. I know a lot of them have signed up to speak here, and there'll probably be a lot of concern, but you know, we went as far as we could to address everything that was economically viable to address, we think, by stating the type of roofs that needed to be constructed and adding conditions for certain materials to be used on the front facades that wasn't required. And just a couple notes. Meredith, I think, got it backwards. We actually wrote in the language that the units to the south of the private drive will be limited to 2-story, and the units along 38th would be allowed to be 3-story. But if you can imagine standing on 38th looking at the front facade of those units, they will look like 2-story units, and that's partly how we take up some of the grade, which was one of those questions. Coming down the drive off of 38th, you basically be going down a descent, and the garages would technically be on a lower level on those units to the north. And then on the units to the south, the garage would be on the first level, and again, those are limited to 2 stories in the language of the ODP. We did that because we wanted to preserve the view plane for people over on Iris Court. And we found out the elevation of their porches that look to the west, and they should be able to stand out on their porches and look over the new construction and still have their view of the mountains. And from the south, also limiting that to 2-story, it kind of helps with the transition, mostly ranch-style houses, then 2-story, then technically 3-story, but again, if you're on 38th, they will look like 2-story structures. And parking, we've written in the code of the ODP that each unit has to have a 2-car garage, and there are 6 visitor parking spots on site and 3 additional ones on Johnson, total 41 spots for the 16 total units. And then there was one more thing I was going to address, but I forget, so maybe it'll come up in your questions.
Great, yeah, I'm sure we have some more questions. So I'll start over here. Questions for the applicant with Commissioner Leo. Commissioner Voss?
Yes, I do have a few. The trees on the east and the south side, who do they belong to?
So I'm pretty sure that all the mature trees that you see are all on the neighboring properties. I think the current owner at one point in time went through and cleared the whole site of all the trees that existed. So all those trees should remain.
Okay. And are these for rent, for sale?
They would be for sale.
And I do want to commend you on listening to the citizens. I think that's appreciated by everybody in the city, and for the honoring their ask. Thank you for that. So you're not going to do anything with the grade improvement? It's not going to all be street level? You're going to go with a
So we
step down, drop?
Yeah, we
whatever.
have to take up grade across the site just because there is that grade there. Since we're already building structures there, it's more cost effective to have the units themselves take up a lot of the grade. There will be, I'm also the engineer for the project, and we've created a grading plan that it'll call for a retaining wall along the east side of that private drive as you come down off of 38th. But that will all be in cut. There will be no fill that we're filling in higher. It'll all be in cut. So there'll be a wall there, and then on the east side of the existing property line, there's actually a retaining wall for that property, for those duplexes to the east. So those houses will be kind of significantly higher than the first, elevations of the units on our property, if you can imagine that. And then the rest of the grade can just kind of naturally be taken up along that drive. There will be some elevation across the units and as you go down that drive, and there shouldn't be a need for many more retaining walls besides the one that I mentioned.
Commissioner Larson?
I find this intriguing, this idea of So if you come in off of Johnson and you're heading east through the private drive, you're going to be going uphill.
Yes. At about a 4 to 5% grade. So
Okay.
Not too
That was going to be my next question. Then when you make the turn and you're approaching 38th, will it be steeper than 4%?
Yeah, so it'll go up at about a 10% grade, and then there will be a flat 4% grade at the top where the cars can stop, look for traffic each way. And obviously when we get into the SDP phase and construction documents, we'll have to do a site triangle analysis where there's calculations that are done based on the angle of the street that you're turning onto, and you have to make sure that all those views are possible, and we'll obviously do that at that stage.
Right. So, and I'm also going to assume, maybe I shouldn't, that you've considered that with our climate here in Colorado, that coming up a fairly steep grade in the winter when it's icy might be a little tricky.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but in this case, it's just something that needs to be done due to the terrain of the site. One thing that I will say that we're lucky with is that it'll have unshaded southern exposure, which will melt things more quickly, and there will also be an HOA on site that hopefully will maintain the road so that the residents can get in and out without trouble.
Very good point. Thank you.
Commissioner Dorsey, any questions?
I was just wondering, in the planning of this, why there was even a reason, what the reason was to exit onto 38th there through and maybe make that more of a parking area rather than a roadway.
So why is there 2 access points?
Right.
I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is if you don't have 2 access points, it creates an issue for fire, where you have to either create large hammerhead turnarounds or very large cul-de-sacs, which just takes up a lot of space. And I think in this site and being close to the amenities and everything like we're talking about, we want to have as much usable space as possible. And we also we talked to the city about maybe just having 1 access point. The opinion of traffic, I think, was to distribute traffic to 2 streets instead of just 1, because I know there is some concern with the neighborhood about traffic on Johnson. So it's something that we talked about, and it wasn't determined, I guess, that 1 access would be the way to go.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ohm?
No questions. I do have a question for staff, though.
Okay. I don't have any further questions, so thank you for that information. Commissioner Ohm, you want to?
Yeah, the one question I had is, what is the steepest grade allowed by the city for I guess, is this going to be a private street?
It's a private street.
Okay.
I don't think we typically have a requirement on private streets.
If you want to come up to the mic, yeah, so we can get it for the record, sure.
I know there's no specific requirements in the Code of Wheat Ridge. If you look at the Code of Jefferson County, they allow up to 12% grades on southern exposed drives without a variance. And sometimes they let them go steeper than that with southern exposure. So just in relation to other codes in other places, that would be an example maybe to think about.
I think my concern is the parallel parking is on, what grade is that?
It'll be on the same grade as the street, so yeah, it'd be about 10%.
Okay.
If that becomes an issue, I think we have more visitor parking than required. We would allow, or we would like for that to be there, just to have the additional space. But if it has to be axed, then maybe it gets axed.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for staff before we open up the citizens forum? Okay, great. I won't ask if there are citizens signed up to speak, because I know we have citizens signed up to speak. All right. Great. All right, I see we have a number of folks who have signed up to speak. So, going to do a couple things. There's something I forgot to do in the last one. It's not really too big a deal that I forgot, but I'm going to remember this time. First thing I would like to say, I'd just like to reiterate, when you make your comments, please make them to us, the commissioners. We'll take notes. We'll ask questions of staff and the applicant to get those comments or concerns addressed as best possible. Since we have so many folks here, I would like you to limit your speaking time to 3 minutes apiece. We've got 13 folks here. That's about 45 minutes of testimony. And I definitely want to get everybody up here who wants to have a chance to speak, but we also need to respect everyone's time too. So if you would like to if you're planning on speaking, could you please stand and raise your right hand, and I'll swear you guys all in at the same time. Okay. All right. Do you swear to tell the truth in this matter as you know it? Yes, great. Thank you. That's what I forgot last time. I've done this 2 years now. You think I remembered some basic stuff. All right, thank you. So we'll start at the top of the list. We'll work our way down. And if you've signed up and you change your mind, you don't want to speak, if you hear that somebody's already voiced your opinion adequately, don't feel obligated to, but you're certainly more than welcome to. So we'll start with Margaret Nelson. Please come up and state your name and address for the record.
I'm Margaret Nelson. I live at 9865 West 37th Avenue, adjacent to the site. We as a neighborhood, when this first came up, gathered over 100 signatures of people opposed to this zoning change. That was when it was still 23 townhomes. I don't know how much that has changed since. I'm also very grateful that the developer was willing to work with the neighborhood to bring that density down a little. 16 is still pretty dense compared to the rest of the surrounding area. I realize that this is going to be something and it needs to be developed, and we'll do what we can. And my main concern at this point is, as I left Denver not even 3 years ago, because my neighborhood was totally destroyed by developers. I lived in the 1700 block of Hooker Street. If you haven't driven down by the Mile High Stadium lately, you should, just to see how horrific things can get when people are pushing high density, because the whole neighborhood is gone. And I was so grateful to be here. And now when this is proposed on my north, I start thinking, well, I don't want to see precedent established here. If this is a one-off thing, for a transitional thing, for this little site to develop this, that's okay. But I don't want this to be seen by the city as precedent to then come south into the R1 neighborhood and push for higher density there as well. I don't, and I'm sure none of the neighbors want to see this either. So, if my support of this is sort of contingent on some kind of promise from the city that they will stand by the R1 zoning in that neighborhood and enforce that, and not allow it, or worse, encourage it to become high density zoning elsewhere in that neighborhood. That's my main issue, and traffic concerns as well. But anyway, I'll let it go at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next up I have, I believe it's Don McDougall.
I'm Don McDougall. I live at 9815 West 37th Avenue. We've been there before the city was even incorporated. We've seen a lot of changes. We're concerned about the density change, of course. It's right in our backyard. There is one other issue here. I'm guessing it's about 10 years ago, somebody came to approach the city for development there, and I think it was 4 duplexes that they were going to place in the place. They couldn't do it because they didn't have 135 feet from Johnson down to the corner where they were going to put their egress. So they went to the neighbor on the corner and said they'd buy a hunk off of his place and he wouldn't sell it to them. So it nixed the deal. They just let it go. And I don't know why that egress there is sure not 135 feet from 38th, and I don't know what's changed, or was that ever like that?
We'll see if we can get some answers for you. Thank you. We'll see if we can get some answers for that as far as if anything's changed.
I'm sorry, I don't hear you very well. It's okay. We are concerned about the change in density. Anybody would be that live where we are. We're on big lots. It's going to be a huge change. There's going to be noise. There's going to be traffic. We're going to shut our view. I know we have to live with some of this, and I know the situation in the Denver area now is to get the most people per square foot that they can get everywhere, and I hope that's not what this is heading for. There was one other little thing, is we were wondering why we couldn't converse with the staff. I didn't try, but some of the neighbors did, and they said they could never converse with the staff. I don't know if this makes any difference, but I was on the planning commission a while back, 15 years ago or something, and I don't remember a lot of this stuff. But there is a situation, they said, that they understand why they can't contact city council or the planning commission, but they didn't understand why they couldn't do the staff. So I think that's about all for me. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ann Thomas? Anything you'd like to say? Is Ann Thomas here? Okay, great. William Francis? That's fine. We'll put you at the bottom of the queue. Chris Dickerman? Okay, no comments. No problem. Delaney Novak? Would you like to come speak? Great. Just come up, state your name and address for the record, and give us your comments.
Delaney Novak. I live directly across 9795 West 38th Avenue. My main concern is the traffic. We have Apple Ridge Cafe, traffic in and out of there. We also have a lot of flow of kids and skateboards coming down, going to the park, and now directly across from me will now be that's a lot of density. That's a lot of driveways. Have you ever been to Apple Ridge Cafe on the weekend or to the park on the weekend? And then the homeowners will be home during the weekend. My son's already had an accident there getting in and out of our driveway. So I can't believe that the traffic didn't warrant a study or something. So that's my main concern. Those three driveways, all there, Apple Ridge Park and the new one. That's it.
Great. Okay, thank you. Brandon, I'm not going to try this last name. I can't quite make it out. Is there a Brandon here who'd like to speak? No Brandons? Okay. Henry starts with an S at 9860 West 37th Avenue. Luthwaite. Yes, sorry. My apologies. Would you like to speak? Okay. I have a guy, Greg Stanford? Great. Would you like to come up and give us some comments, please?
My name's Guy Stanfield, 9870 West 37th Avenue. I do also want to thank Nathan. I think I attended all the meetings.
and he was very good. But we got together and we think, I'd like to say I don't give in. I want it to stay R1, and I think we should. It's just too many concerns. It's too dense. I go outside every Saturday and every Sunday, and I see people illegal parked every day because of the Discovery Park. And nobody's mentioned that. We live by a big park. Very popular, as you all know. It's a great park. And we can't get out on 38th right now during rush hour in the mornings and the evenings. And as you mentioned, get that other exit onto 38th is just terrible. It's just terrible. It won't work. So even though we were talked to very nicely and Nathan showed us, it just is too dense. It's too many kids, too many cars, and we're very proud of our neighborhood. I know y'all probably don't live in our neighborhood, but we like it very much. And we live average here of 60 years. I bet the average is probably pushing 50 years that we've all lived here. And we know it's different than the trend now, but we sure do like our neighborhood. And the people I talked to, I was very involved in getting the 100 and something signatures. They are very opposed to it. Very, very opposed to this. They would like to keep it R1. And I know, I would think that with all due respect that to some of the staff, I heard the word, we haven't done the math several times. And I would think that's got to give some credence to not go forward at this time. Because I think the math needs to be done on all those things that I heard the math hadn't been done yet. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, next up, last name Figless, F-I-G-L-U-S. Great. Come on up.
My name is Ihor Figless. I live at 9775 West 36th Avenue. And I just wanted to quickly run through this. So as Meredith said, the first neighborhood meeting was about 15 people. That was probably because it was just the notices were sent out to the people that were mandated by the 600-foot, I think it's a 600-foot radius. But subsequent to that, we had a neighborhood meeting at one of the residences where we had over 40 people met with our city council people, with Mr. Fitzgerald and Mr. help me out here. Pond, yeah. Anyway, and subsequently did go out and collected, I have these here and I can submit them to you, over 100 signatures of people who said they were opposed to this rezoning. Subsequently, we did work, had a couple meetings with Nathan, and did address, some of the concerns, but, I appreciate that this property is difficult. There's some things that are difficult to work out. And one of the things about this application is, the question is, it says on the application, on the ODP, that this is conceptual in nature. If it's conceptual in nature, how binding is it? Are the conditions that are listed on page 1 and page 2 of this application, of the site plan, how binding is that on the developer? If, for whatever reason, the applicant doesn't develop the property, ends up turning around and selling it to somebody else, will they have carte blanche to do whatever they want because this is only conceptual in nature? Or are they limited by the standards, as you talked about, the architectural standards, the facade standards, the roof lines and so forth of this application? So that's a huge concern, I think, for everybody. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why people are really, and some people are really opposed to this change from the R1 to the ODP. And some of the issues that are brought up by the planning commission, or not the commission, but the department, you know, like that they really didn't look at some of the issues in detail. And you know, you, as the saying goes, you can't squeeze blood of a turnip out of a turnip, you know. And you know, if you try to squeeze water out of a rock, well, it's going to probably crumble. So I think there's some things here that really are need to be examined fully. Need to give pause. And as I said, the big concern is, you know, how binding are these statements that are in the plan on the zoning, on the development of this property. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up is Jennifer Jerdig. No comment. Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Linda Ibach. Okay, thank you. David Hunter.
My questions were all answered in the presentation, but you can change from opposed to undecided now.
Okay. All right. That brings me back to William Francis. Yes. Sure. Go ahead. Come on up. Just state your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Lourdes Weingart, and I live on 3935 Independence Court. I wish I would have known.
Can you spell your last name, please?
Weingart, Weingart. I wish I would have known of these other meetings because I would have attended. I came from Northwest Denver almost 8 years ago to come to Wheat Ridge, and I hated what was going on in my neighborhood that I lived there for 30 years. And my neighborhood there is nothing but how I grew up and brought my son up. And I don't want that happening to Wheat Ridge at all, I think. And I agree with these folks to keep it at R1.
Great. Thank you for your comment. All right. Anyone else who's not on the list who would like to speak? All right. Your turn.
My name's Will Francis. I live at 9785 West 37th Avenue, right next to Don. And I moved into the neighborhood, about 9, almost 10 years ago now. I bought my house because I liked the neighborhood and, you know, enjoyed the bigger lot and everything like that. And I think everybody's brought up a lot of my concerns. One of my big questions is, I guess without a section through the lot, I kind of understand what you're saying as far as the them coming in. Like, basically there'd be, I believe it's 2 floors, like 2 stories above 38th. But then when you come down to the south side of the lot, is the back of that just going to be 3 stories? So, what I think it's allowed to be 45 feet tall, right?
35 feet.
35 feet.
Yep.
Sorry, it's really small print because I printed it out. So that would be 35 feet from the back of the property, right? I believe. I mean, I'm not sure. So that'd be something I'd be concerned with, because like right now I go out, you know, whether I go out in the backyard, like now that it's nice outside, I can go stand in the backyard and you can see the mountains and everything. If I'm in my kitchen, I can see, you know, all the way to like Longs Peak and stuff like that during the winter. It's nice. But if it's, you know, 35 feet from the front of that, you know, basically from the driveway there to the roof lines, it's going to be basically, now I'm looking at a bunch of people's back windows. So it's going to be kind of a bummer. But everybody else has kind of addressed the other things I have as far as the traffic and everything like that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, before I go through the public's concerns with staff and the applicant, I just want to give folks one last opportunity to make any more comments or ask any more questions. Okay, I'll close the public hearing, and we'll get these questions answered as best we can. We'll start at the top, staff. And what we'll do, we'll ask staff these questions first, and then if applicant needs to fill us in, we'll get you back up here. All right. Okay. All right. So the first sort of specific thing I think we could get into is the previous history about the property and the private drive egress onto this property. Mr. McDougall mentioned previous requirement for 135-foot length from along Johnson to cover distance from the corners to the private drive off of Johnson Street. Can you provide any insight into what the requirements are for that sort of stuff?
Oh, thanks. I remember that neighborhood meeting and working with that developer, and we looked. They never went forward with the application. And I know Don and some of the other folks maybe remember that 135-foot separation. I remember something about the drive being pushed further south, but since they didn't move forward, we didn't memorialize it anywhere. The engineers right now, I mean, we have different staff. I would suspect we still have the same standards. So I'm not sure exactly where that is or why it was or who was the one who wanted that. So that's one of the answers I don't have.
But as far as current standards as related to this ODP application, it meets all the current city standards for distance from the corner and from the lot lines and so forth for this type of development? All right. Now, a lot of concerns about traffic. I remember you mentioned that in your report that this doesn't meet the threshold in terms of density added to trigger an automatic study, but there is some concern with the park right nearby. I cycle through that R1 neighborhood at least once a week. I understand the neighbors' concerns about parking and traffic. Can you speak a little more in depth to that and maybe discuss sort of the reasons for those thresholds and maybe reiterate the traffic that's anticipated? Okay.
So yeah, we typically look at the trips generated by the development. This development is anticipated to generate 16 trips. That includes to and from the development in the peak hour. That's basically in the peak hour, one additional car every 4 minutes. Standard practice by the city is to not do a more in-depth study unless you have 60 trips in that peak hour. And that's even more conservative than what the Institute of Traffic Engineers recommends, which is 100 trips. So it's basically, from experience the city has, this is really not going to impact the neighborhood significantly.
Okay, and this might be hard to answer on the spot, but in relation to the number of trips generated by the park, when the park was put in, can you provide any sort of relative, comparison between like what the park has generated since it was put in versus a typical development like this?
So I can't really answer that. I haven't been around long enough to know about the park development and the traffic that it generated. Sorry, I can't really elaborate on that.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot. I understand the data's probably somewhere, but it's not always at our fingertips. Okay. Okay, as far as how binding conditions are in the ODP, I think the Commission's probably pretty aware of this, but could you reiterate for the public how conditions and notes in the ODP work, how they're, as far as like transferring those with the property when it's sold, how zoning is carried with the property and so forth?
So the ODP is one part of the zone change process. And essentially, what you do when you're having a plan development approved is creating your own zoning for that property. So any of the restrictions that are put on the document, such as the height, the setbacks, the number of units, even some of the architectural stuff they incorporated, becomes a recorded document. And so those standards have to be carried through, whether it's this developer or someone else comes along to buy the property, those remain in place. And if they want to change any of those standards, like increase the number of units or change the height, they would have to come back through a planning commission. It'd be another rezoning hearing.
Yeah, so back through planning commission, back through city council. Okay, thank you. I understand the concerns from several members of the public about the very radical change in the housing landscape in Northwest Denver. I actually used to live in Northwest Denver at 43rd and Quitman before I moved to Wheat Ridge 15 years ago, so I get it. Okay, I think we've got a question for the applicant that maybe the applicant can best answer us. If you could come on up, I'd appreciate it. Yes.
Can I address the allegation that I was not making myself available to the neighborhood?
Certainly. I'm sorry I overlooked that. That was in my
Yeah,
notes. Could you maybe speak also generally to how staff is available to address concerns from the public on any issue?
Yes. So the requirement with any zone change request is that we have a neighborhood meeting whereby all the residents and property owners within a 600-foot radius are notified of and invited to come to this meeting. And we had a really good attendance. We had it at the rec center, and I thought it went really well. It was a great dialogue. And the applicant actually followed up with them. They kept inviting me to meetings outside of City Hall, and it's really difficult for staff to like step outside of the box that we have, that we operate in. I had a very lengthy outlook, what do you call that? Yeah, or email conversations with a couple of kind of the key neighbors, one of whom spoke, another person has not spoke. So I think I was being pretty accessible I would as with any other applicant. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks for addressing that. I appreciate it. So, a question for the applicant about where that 35-foot height is measured from, especially when we're dealing with a structure that's built on a slope. Is that 35 feet going to be measured from basically where the building starts at the bottom of that slope? Or is it going to be measured from, say, the front door, maybe at the top of that slope?
It'll be from its highest point, or from the greatest, I guess.
The greatest difference?
Greatest height difference. Yeah,
Okay.
so it'll be from the back. And I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it's to the peak. I think it's to the midpoint.
It's to the midpoint, I believe.
It's to the midpoint. We also try to take the elevation, the average height of the four corners, or not the four corners, but 4 points of the building that's being measured, and take the average and then apply the height standards, and to mid-roof on a sloped roof.
That's right. Thank you for reminding us.
And, as you look at the site today, no part of the site will be 35 feet from the existing grade. We're actually going to be robbing dirt from the northern part of the site, moving it to the south where it's limited to 2 stories, to help kind of take up some of that terrain again. And the exact reason we went to limiting the height of the stories of those lower 4 lots is just to maintain the view corridor as much as possible. I know it's very unfortunate when you move to a neighborhood for a view, and something's built beside you, and yeah, I mean, it's not the best situation, and I feel bad about it, but it happens, and there's an empty lot here that's not going to stay empty forever, and so we did the best we could to try to study the heights of at least the neighbors to the east to Iris Court to make sure that they maintained a view directly to the west. Now the ones to the south, there's terrain moving up, so I haven't done a lot of research, I haven't stood in their backyards, but looking directly north from all the southern units, they're kind of just looking at a gradual grade going up anyway. So maybe that's preferred to looking at houses, but the view is really to the west.
Okay, great. Thanks for helping us through that height issue. All right, I'm just going to go through these one more time here. Okay. All right. Okay. Great. Do the commissioners have any other questions that came up as a result of testimony from the public that they'd like to have answered? Anyone? All right. In that case, I will entertain a motion.
Before we get to that, Mr. Chairman, I do have a question for staff that in the packet today, there's a letter from a Mr. Bill Gordon regarding a lateral ditch. Was this addressed?
A local drainage swale that goes through the open space area, and it collects, if I answered this wrong, correct me, but it goes under the road over to another drainage area and eventually over to Lena Gulch. Did I say that right? I don't know that it's a regulated ditch. And that's my answer to that.
And the concrete vault? What happens to that?
Yeah, so there's a vault. It's not shown on the drawings, and it's associated with, I guess, a irrigation lateral. The city doesn't really regulate those, so we're not aware exactly where that is. The swale that Meredith was referring to is along the south property line, and that's just a drainage swale. It collects runoff from the east and the south, and it goes in a culvert under Johnson Street onto Lena Gulch under 38th. Certainly, the applicant would have to work with the ditch company and make sure that they get that clean out installed. But the city doesn't really regulate those. So at this point in the process, we're not exactly sure where that ditch is.
Would that be something that, the developer has a response?
After receiving that letter, I did hold a meeting on site with the gentleman who wrote it. He was a representative from the ditch company. I don't know how long ago, but decades ago, there used to be an open irrigation ditch that flew in the area, and they put it underground in a pipe under 38th. And this was the most downstream property that had rights off that ditch. They have since been severed and sold to Consolidated Mutual, but they still use that irrigation, the old irrigation tap, to do basically backflow to wash out the ditch. And their only concern is their ability to be able to do that. And the same condition actually is across the street to the north, where they used to have a vault or something that they since have swapped out a valve and then moved a small line to an adjacent storm sewer. So they can open that up, allow the irrigation water to flow through it to clear out any debris in their line, and it just goes into the storm sewer system. And they're proposing the same thing basically on the south side. They'll put a valve maybe somewhere in the sidewalk and have a small line that there's a storm inlet on the north property line of this project on 38th that they would just tie into. So it's kind of, it's not a non-issue, but there's an answer to how to solve it.
And then this would be spec'd out, specified somehow between now and the
SDP phase.
And yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right. If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval of case number WZ-18-09, request for approval of a zone change from residential 1 to planned residential development with an outline development plan for property located at 9800 West 38th for the following reasons. 1, the proposed zone change will serve as a land use transition between 38th Avenue and that neighborhood to the south and could serve as a catalyst for additional investment in the area. Number 2, the proposed zone change is consistent with the goals and objectives of the city's comprehensive plan. Number 3, all agencies can serve the property with improvements installed at the developer's expense. Number 4, the criteria used to evaluate a zone change support the request with the following conditions. All minor corrects occur prior to the city council public hearing. Corrects.
Is there a second to this motion? Okay, is there any discussion before we vote?
Yeah, I would just like to, I know right now it's just the ODP, but I would encourage staff to really look at the proposed 10% grade in that parallel. I really have some concerns about the angle of, it doesn't matter if it's east movement or west movement coming south into that private drive, and that the visibility of somebody in the parallel parking getting in or backing out, or even a child, I'm envisioning there just being kind of like a hump, and you just cannot see traffic either way coming out. And so I'm really concerned about that area, whether or not even the parallel parking just adds to it. But I'm really concerned about that first, and I don't know what that magic number is, if it's 30 feet or 50 feet, but it being really steep transition to that sidewalk. And so that's kind of the only comment I have on that.
Okay. Any other points of discussion? I'd just like to say I appreciate the efforts that the developer has gone through in terms of making this development, even though it is higher density than obviously R1. It is in a transitional area. There is going to be something here, and it isn't as high density as I'm sure a developer probably could have convinced Planning Commission maybe to put it up in. So I'm encouraged by that willingness of developers to work with neighborhoods on compromises to help maintain the character of the neighborhoods when possible. So with that, I'll call for a vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
All right. Okay, next up, we have 2 more cases to go. These are both ordinance amendment cases. Case number ZOA-18-02. This is an ordinance amending of Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws to include an additional criterion for review of applications for special use permits.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, we've got 2 legislative items to wrap up tonight's meeting. So two amendments to the zoning code. The first is a proposal to amend the special use permit review criteria. And this was, both these ordinance actually were initiated at City Council direction earlier this year, and have been discussed to some extent with City Council at study session, but this is the first opportunity for formal discussion in front of the Planning Commission as a public hearing. Council has specifically recommended, in regards to the SUP criteria, adding a 9th criteria for review, which would require an application to be reviewed relative to consistency with the city's comprehensive plan and applicable sub-area plans. So that would just add 1 more criteria for review that already to the 8 that already exist. As the Commission is aware, any amendment to Chapter 26 requires a recommendation from the Planning Commission to City Council for their consideration when they conduct their public hearing on the proposed ordinance. We we think it probably makes good sense. I mean, the city's comprehensive plan and various subarea plans are important land use policy documents. We spend a lot of time and effort, including the Planning Commission, developing those plans. They're used in different parts of the city's zoning code in terms of mostly, as we did tonight, evaluating rezonings, and that's kind of the most important use of them. They're also used, particularly as it pertains to lot size and street network, in evaluating subdivision plats as well. But this and special use permits are probably another important land use decision where it would be a good thing to do in our minds to look at the comp plan and say, is it consistent or not? I think it's important to note how we use those criteria, that an application is not required to meet all 9 criteria. The language that's in the code is really just generally look at these criteria relative to the land use application, and on balance, I'm paraphrasing, but determine whether a special use permit should be approved. As you are likely aware, special use permits can be approved administratively. There's several conditions under which they get kicked to City Council. Unlike many of our land use applications, they actually don't come to the Planning Commission. But if there's a few instances, again, where they would go to a City Council review. One, if there was a valid neighborhood objection during the public noticing period. 2, if I deny it, if I don't, the community development director doesn't think it's approvable. And 3, if there's a condition of approval recommended by the director of community development that the applicant objects to and wants to take that objection to City Council. So that's kind of the regulatory process, just as background. But in terms of this specific ordinance, we are recommending approval, and be glad to answer questions.
All right, Commissioner Leo, any questions? Okay, Commissioner Voss, any questions? Commissioner Larson, any questions? Okay, I'll come back to you. Commissioner Dorsey, Commissioner Ong.
Okay, so I have some questions on it seems like the existing criteria is generally kind of puts the onus on the developer. But this 9th proposed criteria, the developer really is in control of. I'm just trying to think kind of outside the box. So if, let's say hypothetically, there's a project, it goes through the special use permit, and it's not a standard in perpetuity. It could be determined time. And it does that, and then staff determines that, hey, we need to update a sub-area plan or a comp plan, and now that particular project is, I don't know if I'd say, I guess, non-compliance, and it does not get renewed for its special use permit. The developer has no control over that. I think that's my only point, is that the other criteria seem to be more from a developer standpoint, that you need to do this or you could jeopardize your special use permit, whereas the sub-area plan, comp plan, that's kind of taken out of. And I understand it's a special use permit and there's criteria, but could you kind of, I guess, walk me through that scenario?
Yeah, it's a good observation, and I think at the last study session that we had with City Council, they actually softened the language so that it wasn't to be read in a strict way of, this is in conformance with the comp plan. The way I would answer that question is that, you have to use kind of a standard of reasonableness. Many of our special use permits go into, and I'll use an example that really is, I think, part of the context. I'm speculating, but for why we're entertaining this change in code. There was a auto use that was approved by City Council for a special use on 44th Avenue earlier this year. And there was some concern in the neighborhood that the project that we had, the Fruitdale sub-area plan on 44th, and that encourages kind of more homegrown uses and not auto-intensive uses necessarily, mixed-use development. But it was an existing site. It was improved with numerous buildings. It had a layout that really was formerly been a light industrial site that was operated by a commercial pipe fitting operation, so with outdoor storage. So the site had been designed and improved in a manner that really made it well suited for this automotive use. In contrast, if you're looking at an application that requires a special use permit for a raw piece of ground that hasn't been developed, if they'd come in for a special use permit and we looked at this new criteria and said, well, I don't know about an auto use which requires a special use permit on this location of land because our sub-area plan encourages mixed use, so likely wouldn't support it in that context. So I think there's some different kind of contextual ways that we'd use that in kind of a standard of reasonableness.
And then the other thing is, I know, for instance, if there was a mixed-use commercial zoning and that land wanted to put in, say, a hospital, that would be a special use permit. I would assume that would be granted in perpetuity for a special use permit.
Right, and I'd say generally speaking, we grant special use permits in perpetuity.
Okay.
The limitation, we have three options. We can grant them in perpetuity, and then we can choose to grant them specific to an applicant. So that's an option as well. Or we can limit them in time, right? We very rarely, I can't think of a case where we limit them in time. We do sometimes limit them to an applicant. So if some of the reasons that we support a special use permit for a daycare maybe, or an auto use, is because we have a really good operational plan from an operator that we're talking to specifically about how they're going to operate the business. In that case, we'll often limit them to that applicant so that if someone new comes in and wants to do an automotive use, that they have to have that conversation with us again.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
Okay, I don't have any questions at all. Seems understandable. All right, motion.
Do we need to open up?
Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. I'm going to open the public hearing. Has anyone signed up to speak? I don't see anyone in the audience. If they signed up to speak, they're not here anymore. So not hearing anyone wanting to speak, I'm going to close the public hearing, and we'll move on to entertain motions.
I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending Chapter 26 to include an additional criterion for review of applications for special use permits.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion?
Do we need to make any reference to the exhibit draft ordinance, or is this good for the motion?
I think it's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, then I'll call for a vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
All right, wonderful. Okay, on to our final case tonight. ZOA-18-03. This is an ordinance amending Chapter 26 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning electrified fences. Staff, what you got for us?
Yeah, similar set of circumstances in terms of an ordinance for consideration that was initiated by City Council. The city's municipal code is currently silent to electric fences. We define various types of fences, specifically in our code: wood fences, walls, ornamental iron fence, chain link fences. And then we also define prohibited fence types. And I'll elaborate on that in a little bit as to how that applies in this situation, or has at least historically. This topic, so it's come up in the past. People have inquired about electric fences over the years, most recently for Kettleson campers, which is now operated by Camping World. But we've, in the past, interpreted the code such that electric fences have not been allowed in the city. That's what we've communicated to people that have inquired about them. So we've done that because we've determined them to be a prohibited fence type. So the code speaks to prohibited fences as those that would be, and I'm paraphrasing, a danger to the public's life and safety, as determined by the chief building official, director of public works, or police chief. And those people have been involved in that decision-making process, and that those past decisions determining that those are a prohibited fence. So if they're determined to be a hazard, they are by definition prohibited. So that determination lies at a staff level. So that's the past. That's what we've looked at. As I said, City Council initiated this request in large part from a request by a fence company and the property owner and operator at the Kettleson Campers site. They've been inquiring about installing such a fence for several years, dating back to 2014. And our initial communication with them is just that. It was a prohibited fence type, but they were persistent because they've had a fair amount of vandalism and criminal activities and theft over the years. And it's again escalated, unfortunately, in the early part of this year. So they reapproached us again. The result of the process in 2014 was such that they actually applied for a variance to install a fence at 9 feet in height inside of the existing fence that's there and has been there. We sent that out on referral. The school district, who has the property adjacent, the elementary school on the south, had some concerns. We had some concerns as well in a couple of regards. Some of those concerns manifested themselves in a recommendation of approval of the variance, actually an approval of an administrative variance that the community development director can deliver. One of the conditions was that it be a minimum 3-foot separation inside of that existing external fence. The logic behind that, I wouldn't say scientific, but the logic behind that was essentially we had some concerns with people's ability to reach through the fence potentially. Not easy to do, but possible, and come into contact with the electric fence. I think some people may say, buyer beware, you shouldn't do that, but we thought that was a potential public safety concern, again, falling back into that prohibited fence type definition if that didn't happen. There were the other reason for that 3 feet distance, we felt that if it was a smaller distance, someone could potentially climb over the 6-foot fence, come into contact with the electrified fence, and not have an ability to get away from it, right? So if it was a 1-foot area, it might be too small that you were perpetually exposed to that electricity, as opposed to the quick contact that, based on the information they provided to us, is not a hazard to the person's safety. It's a shock, and it's meant to deter and be a security measure, but it's not harmful to the health. And we have a study from a scientist out of the University of Wisconsin that provides that information. They actually appealed that determination to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment affirmed our conditions of approval. And it just kind of sat there until now in 2018. They're back based on, again, the criminal activity that they've been experiencing this year. So we've drafted an ordinance at council's direction that would allow these types of fences through what we call a special use permit, what we were talking about just before this case. So a special use permit process where we could add conditions of approval that were appropriate for the context. So that separation might be less than 3 feet, depending on the context that we're in, depending on the technology of the type of fence that's used. So it could be that we would approve something where they'd have a separation of less than 3 feet based on the location. We've also kind of cooked into the definition of an electrified fence that it's really a non-starter to even ask for an electrified fence if you don't have a history of criminal activity. And that's not quantified in any way, but we felt that was important to say we're not going to allow these anywhere for no particular reason. We're going to allow them if they're justified based on that precedent. So that's the box that we're trying to put this in. We've proposed limiting them in height to 9 feet. There's no super great logic. I think from what we've heard from these types of users, their preferred height would be 10 feet. Part of the rationale for the 9 feet, I think, is simply that's what we approved before, and they were willing to go down to that height and still find it to be acceptable. I think the concern is, they're always going to be located behind another perimeter fence, but if the electric fence behind the perimeter fence were 6 feet, it'd be pretty simple for that person trying to, trespass to get up on top of that 6-foot fence and jump over the electric fence and not have to come into contact with it. So I think that's part of the logic behind that higher height, and then just limiting it as to the kind of lowest height in general that would achieve the means that's desired of the electric security. So we didn't initiate this one, but and we're trying to put it in kind of as tight a box as we can by the manner that we've drafted the ordinance. And again, glad to answer questions.
Great. Okay. Commissioner Ohm, any questions?
Thank you. So I took a quick look at actually the state of California electrified security fences for reference. And a couple questions I had was, so in the code, there's a couple things. If the board made a Board of Adjustment recommended a 3-foot separation from the 6-foot perimeter fence for safety concerns, why is this not part of the ordinance? It seems to be a good idea, and that's kind of what California had to is they had a perimeter fence, and then behind it they had a security electrified fence. And I don't have any disagreement with I understand the reasoning for the rationale for the 3-foot, but why not for this just put that in the ordinance that you need to have a perimeter fence and then a 6-foot height perimeter and then a 3-foot separation to electrified fence?
Well, I think it's a good question, a good observation, and again, that had been our thinking at the time. I think the reality of the parties that are involved that are wanting to install this specifically at Kettleson is that is not acceptable to them, principally for a couple reasons. There's kind of a technical issue that maybe I'm not best suited to explain, but the other issue is just real estate, right? That you lose on tighter, smaller sites, you lose 3 feet times, whatever area that is. It's not insignificant, and it becomes a kind of a potentially a maintenance concern. Does it gather trash that you have to clean up frequently? So those were some of the reasons, but I could understand the logic both ways. I think they'd like to have the minimum separation to address those two issues.
Okay, and then I don't see any references to signage at specific intervals. Basically, electric fence. Hey, this is a high, electric fence. I don't know what the specific wattage is, but warning signs. That's something I'd like to see in the ordinance that says you need to install warning signs at so many intervals, so you just don't go up and touch it, and then you figure it out that it's. And I think that'd be because there could be somebody with pacemakers, but some type of signage. I think there should be something in the code for health safety, for a public for signage.
Yeah, and that was a condition of our approval when we did grant that variance as well. So I agree with the logic. We, with an SUP, we have the ability to put conditions of approval. Right. So I think the hope or the idea was that we could kind of fine tune and tailor those to the specifics of whatever location that we're dealing, whatever technology that we're dealing with. But I don't think there would be great harm in codifying that.
Okay. And then, should there be any references to the international standard IEC in the code?
I'm not sure they need to be. It's certainly an important observation, and I know the technology that we're looking at with Electric Guard Dog is the company that's working with Kettleson. They're out of South Carolina. They've provided documentation that shows that they're fully ICE compliant. I don't think we need to add the language here because, I think we've adopted the National Electric Codes as part of our building codes.
Okay.
So I think they'll apply without having to add them in this ordinance.
Okay. And then I understand the reasoning for the 9-foot height, but my question is more from specifying components. Do they manufacture a 9-foot height fence, or is the industry standard typically 10-foot, and that's why Kettleson, for instance, wants a 10-foot, and the guard dog, because a 10-foot is what they manufacture, and if they have to do a 9-foot, now they have to, I have no idea how these are put together, but if they do a 9-foot, would they have to do some type of special manufacturing that is really expensive, because 10-foot is the industry standard, what you can just buy off the shelf?
It's a good question. I don't get the sense from this company, at least Electric Guard Dog, that is the case. It doesn't seem, it's their preferred dimension for their system, but I don't think it's like a custom design, but I can't say that with certainty. I would say that by codifying the fact that you can have a 9-foot fence, you'd still have an ability to ask for a variance if there were reasons why a 10-foot was more appropriate for reasons such as you suggest.
Okay. And then my last question is the ordinance just says electrified fences, and I feel like that might be a little too broad. This is Wheat Ridge. There are some farms. There potentially could be cattle fences. I think there should be a distinction between cattle fences and what this sounds like is an electrified security fence with the staff. Could you just call it an electrified security fence? Because that's kind of basically what this is versus just electrified fence.
Yeah, and I think we've snooped around at a few draft ordinances from other jurisdictions, and I think some of those have used that type of language as well. So again, I don't think that would necessarily do any harm. That's certainly the intent.
Okay. That's the only questions that I have.
Great. Commissioner Dorsey, any questions? No. All right, I'll move over here. Any questions from you?
I guess the only question I have is it goes back to their original request from Electric Guard Dog and Kettleson. And when the city said that in order to grant the special use, the fence would have to be 3 feet setback, only turned on after normal business hours and not electrified in the stretch along where the elementary school is. And the company then objected to all three of those?
Yes, but what they appealed was the 3-foot separation, that requirement was necessary, triggered the definition of a prohibited fence type. So that was the specific condition that they appealed to the Board of Adjustment.
And again, if I know the question was asked earlier, but this idea of specifying the distance between the exterior and the electrified fence, the reason that it's not in there is?
Well, let's be honest, right? I mean, this is really being triggered by this application, right? By the desire for Kettleson and Electric Guard Dog to install this, and that's not what they would like to propose, right? They'd like to propose a different dimension that we can, I guess, generally get our arms around, to the extent that, I'd agree with Commissioner Ohm that the signage is important so people know what's there and they take their own risk. In the case of the school children, I think we were worried, and I'll answer your question, but that they, aren't going to read those signs, right? And if they kick a soccer ball over the fence and they have skinny enough arms to reach through, that they might try and do that, right? So that was part of the rationale in that specific context. But in this case, I think, again, if we're in part, what we're doing is trying to solve through a code amendment, a site-specific problem. If we were to add that 3-foot requirement, I would say we're not solving that problem. I'm not saying it's not, you can make that recommendation. Maybe that's a good recommendation, but it's just, I know it's not going to solve the problem for Electric Guard Dog. They're proposing like a 6-foot 6-inch separation. And what that does in their minds is, I mean, you have to, if you're going to touch this, you have to consciously do it, right? Because there's going to be signs that people, you know, it's incumbent upon them to read. And you just kind of have to be willing to say that. And the other thing that's important of that 6-inch dimension is I don't think it puts someone at risk of the chances of someone getting stuck in between the two areas and not being able to get away. I mean, they're not going to be able to get into that space. It's going to be too small. So that concern goes away. And then it's really just you have to be okay with the notion that someone could kind of choose to reach through and come into contact with that fence, and that's you have to be okay with that.
So then the specifications, the distance between the types of signage and whatnot would be in the special use?
Correct. Yeah, so there would presumably be conditions of approval on all of these that are kind of finely tailored to the site-specific circumstances and the technology of, because it's, you know, certainly not just one provider out there, which is the only one that we've worked with thus far.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on. Any questions from you?
Yes, please. What's the need for an electrified fence if they can't, are they not allowed to put up a high enough fence that people can't get over? Is this the issue? They've got a low fence people are laddering over or something?
They have a 6-foot fence, and I think, you know, it's pretty easy to climb over those. You know, they've tried a variety of security devices, cameras, which I think many people are well aware that just memorializes what happened. It doesn't solve the problem, right? It doesn't stop the criminal activity per se, typically. So that's been the problem. They've had some people cut the fence as well. So there's just that 6-foot fence, which is the maximum that you can have in general without a variance, has not proven successful.
And then have they ever had a security force on site that?
They have, and they've not found that to be successful either. That it's a big enough site. It's multiple acres with a lot of places to hide, and that they've had criminal activity occur even with that kind of security presence.
What kind of criminal activity are we talking about?
We're talking about theft of some of the stuff that's inside of the RVs, TVs, generators. I think they've actually had some RVs actually driven off the lot through the front fence, and they've had a lot of vandalism. So they've had a lot of presumably homeless people that come in and you know, take advantage of the accommodations, but then also do damage, right? They've had fires started inside of RVs and other this kind of damage that's occurred based on homeless people occupying them.
And then just an understanding, these three, the setback we've already talked about, only turned on after normal business hours?
Yeah.
Is that part of your allowance on the special use?
I think it would often likely be a condition on approval of a special use permit. There may be instances where it wouldn't be for whatever reason.
But in this particular case?
But in this case, yes.
Right. Yeah. And then the Pennington side's not going to have electrified?
No, it will,
Oh,
and I think we've talked with them, and I think they're going to be okay with that.
And do they have any concern with the 1 foot, 3 foot, 6-inch?
I think, like us, they still have some concerns, but not to the point where they're going to formally object.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Leo, nothing? All right. Go ahead.
So I have a couple more questions. So something that sometimes what I do when I'm crafting details is I try to, you know, put some of the responsibility back on the manufacturer. I kind of can see why maybe we don't want to do 3 feet. You know, what is 3 feet coming from? You know, will the city be liable if somebody does get shocked and we specify 3 feet? You know, if we say 6 inches and somebody gets shocked, do we take on that responsibility? And I don't think we should specify, some states such as California specify what the duration and the repetition of the impulse shock is. I'm wondering if we should have some language in there that just simply states, you know, the voltage, duration, repetition, and distance between the security fence and the perimeter fence as determined by manufacturer. And then that kind of puts the, you know, the liability back in the manufacturer. The manufacturer says, hey, we need to have 6 inches in between the fences, then that's what it is. I do have concerns with trash, particularly along I-70, as this is, of, I mean, I guess that's a code thing, but, you know, what happens when you get a 6-foot width fence and you got bags flying and trash flying and it gets in between that, and is that, how hard is that going to be to clean in between the 6 inches? 3 foot's not a problem, and I definitely understand the problem of taking up a lot of real estate. That is a lot of real estate, and so I don't know what that number is, but I mean, I guess, you know, if we said as determined by manufacturer and they put in 6 inches and there's trash, then that's a code enforcement issue that they have to keep the trash out.
And I know in speaking with the electric guard dog folks specifically that they will have to have a very regular maintenance program, because if they get debris in there, it basically trips the system. So if there's a plastic bag in there, you know, a chip bag or whatever, it has the potential to trip the system and it won't work. So they will be responsible for maintenance. So whatever distance that they're going to create, they're going to have to create it in such a manner that they'll be able to clean it.
Okay.
What kind of security do they have up at Camper World on Youngfield? That's,
for whatever reason, not much, and they don't experience that crime there.
I can hardly.
Any other questions?
Is that asphalt between the 2 fences or grass? What do you anticipate would be between the?
I wouldn't anticipate grass. I think we'd want to have it either be something non-permeable like asphalt, or a good gravel base, something that generally is not conducive to weed growth.
Okay, I've just got a question. I think I just echo Commissioner Ohm's comments about agricultural use of electrified fencing. We don't have our resident urban ag expert here, Commissioner Weaver. She's not here today. I really think that's an omission that we might want to correct here. Because while granted there isn't a ton of ag use in Wheat Ridge, there's some, and I could see how electrified fencing for ag use could be beneficial for those businesses. And, you know, excluding that or limiting electrically charged fence use from that business, but including it only for criminal deterrence, specifically as we're saying for this one particular business. I know that's not being encoded in the law, but that's what's prompting this. To me, doesn't seem fair. So I don't know. Is there any way we can address the ag use as well?
I hear what you're saying. It might be challenging to do kind of on the fly, just because it's a different set of circumstances, right? So just thinking that it would, like for instance, I don't think most ag uses, if they wanted a typical kind of cattle fence, would also want to have a 6-foot fence outside of that starts to get to be a really expensive fence, and not typical. I mean, it's kind of, you don't need both, right? If you're going to have a 6-foot fence, that's pretty good cow deterrent as well. So we'd have to really kind of think about it differently. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure it would be easy to fix tonight.
Okay. Well, hopefully City Council will read the minutes and they'll hear me yammering on about it, and maybe they'll...
Well, might I ask, has ag community been questioned or?
We haven't reached out to the agricultural community in any way, no. And we haven't, I can't recall that we've had an inquiry from an agricultural user that wanted to put in some sort of a electric fence.
Well, I'm also considering about, for example, there's a backyard urban ag farm that along Clear Creek that's growing, I believe it's industrial hemp. And they've got, tall fences and video surveillance and signs and so forth. I could see a situation where they might prefer an electrified fence if they have some sort of criminal activity. I could see how this might apply to that. There again, you've got the two fence issue for a ag solution versus a more commercial solution. So I don't know. Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. Any other questions from commissioners? Okay. In that case, I'll call for a motion.
I move to recommend approval of the proposed ordinance amending Chapter 26 concerning electrified fences.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote.
Motion carries 4-2.
All right, any old business? I don't see any on the agenda, but, okay, any new business? Looks like
We gave you a bunch of new business because we knew it was going to be 10:30 and you'd want to keep talking. How much of an update does Planning Commission want on those topics? I'm glad to provide one.
Just a sentence or two on each, I think is fine.
Okay. So City Council recently prioritized its strategic plan, the strategic plan that was developed last year, and then fine-tuned this year and prioritized. So the priorities will involve the Planning Commission, so I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up that you're going to get put to work this year. Update of the neighborhood revitalization strategy, which is a policy document that dates back to 2005, and again, we can talk about that more later, but you'll be quite significantly involved in that. Development of an I-70 and Kipling corridor strategy, which could actually become something like a sub-area plan at some point. We actually budgeted for a sub-area plan this year. We're in the process of hiring an urban design consultant to do kind of a vision plan, a high-level plan for the corridor, so that should be interesting and could involve y'all. They've recommended finalizing the design of the 38th Avenue streetscape, which is obviously an issue that the community has been a little, high-centered on for a number of years, but that's encouraging in my mind. As a related matter, they've also approved for staff to hire a consultant to finalize a design for the green. So the green area in front of the former middle school, Stevens Elementary, where we hold a lot of public events, so to make that an even better space to hold those events. So that's exciting. We're shortlisting design consultants on, I think, Monday of next week. So another Kipling one, which is to work with CDOT to prioritize the I-70 Kipling interchange improvements, which is a federal environmental process that's been underway for a number of years, and then set a policy on shared housing. That was another topic that was that's been kind of front and center, and I think we'll probably end up talking about ADUs as part of that, just because some people associate the two. So fun stuff, I think, and stuff that will involve y'all. So I'll leave it at that for that topic. Freestanding ERs. We've had a moratorium on freestanding emergency rooms since 2016. We've extended it several times. It's set to expire in August of this year, and Council's direction is to not extend the moratorium again. We've been waiting for the state to act, and they acted a little bit. They passed some legislation that I think is all they're ever going to pass, so it's kind of time for us to potentially take action. So we're going to talk with council once more, actually on June 18th, to see what kind of approach they want to take. But we'll be in front of you, much like tonight, with an ordinance likely on how to regulate freestanding ERs in the next few months. I think we've got it scheduled. We do have it scheduled. I don't know if, do you recall, Zach, what day it is? It's coming up here soon, so that's on the radar too. The neighborhood revitalization strategy specifically, which again is on the priority list for City Council. We had a meeting with our consultant just this morning to talk about some of the technical aspects of that, but it's a really important policy document for the city, still guides a lot of our decision making. I think it was mentioned in some of the staff reports tonight and the presentations. It's 13 years old. It's been a really successful document and has guided a lot of the work of our department over the years, whether it be the adoption of better comprehensive plans and kind of the unwinding of our regulatory environment that we've done over the last 10 years. So it'll be a very public process, maybe the most as it was back in 2004 and 5. This time, and this is different than last time, City Council has recommended appointing a steering committee, and those steering committee applications are out there live. We haven't specifically talked about whether planning commissioners are kind of eligible to be on that committee. I don't know that you're precluded from being on it, but knowing that we're gonna be engaging you as a body on several occasions during the 9-month-long process, you'll get engaged with the consultant and staff specifically. So it may be less appropriate for you to be on the actual steering committee since you're being engaged that way. But again, there's nothing that precludes you from applying. But if you've got friends or neighbors or people that you think would be well suited for that and are maybe looking for an opportunity to serve in some way in local government, that's a limited time period engagement, doesn't require a 4-year appointment. So there's an application and more information on the website, and just encourage you to be aware of that. Application deadline is June 25th. And then what else? We had, citizen survey. So every other year we do a citizen survey. It's done by a third-party research consultant out of Boulder, National Research Partners. It's what they do. It's a statistically valid survey, and we benchmark ourselves against other Front Range communities and nationally on a number of different questions, ranging from kind of quality of life issues to quality of city services. This year we asked some pointed questions on building heights and bulk playing, on accessory dwellings, and on short-term rentals. So all intended to help inform more discussions on those topics during the coming year, and the possibility of potentially adopting local regulations on any of those topics. So we've got good data. It's, I think, really interesting to read. They do some pretty interesting cross-tabulations based on demographics. I think they do a good job on the survey. So that too, there's a link on the homepage of the city's webpage if you're interested in kind of seeing what your fellow citizens, and perhaps some of you took it. I don't know. It's mailed out to 4,500 people, which gives you about a 5% confidence margin in terms of what the answers, how reliable they are. So pretty good data. So that's my update.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That's all very interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to a lot of that. All right. There being nothing else, do we have a motion to adjourn? Or should we just have a sleepover here tonight?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. Let's vote.
Motion passed 6-0.
All right. We're adjourned.